You have just woken up as a T-Rex in a steaming Cretaceous floodplain. For the next 3 hours, you are going to experience a fierce Triceratops battle, a sudden flash flood, and even fire raining from the asteroid in the sky, and this won't be easy, so good luck. But before we get into this journey of a T-Rex, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, like the video, and why not leave a comment on where you are tuning in from and what animal you want me to cover next. Now let's begin this epic adventure together. The world comes to me slowly, like water seeping through sand. First, there's the coolness against my flank, tiny droplets of dew clinging to the pebbled scales that armor my massive frame. Each scale catches the morning moisture like a miniature shield, and I feel the weight of the night's humidity settling across my 7-ton body. The sensation is almost pleasant, this brief respite from the heat that will soon bake the floodplain into a shimmering mirage. My eyes open to a world painted in the soft grays and purples of dawn. Above me, the towering Araucaria trees stretch their ancient branches toward a sky that's just beginning to blush with the first hints of sunrise. These aren't the pine trees you might know from your modern world, but something far older, more primitive. Their bark is thick and deeply grooved, scarred by countless storms and seasons. Between them, the feathery fronds of cycads create a canopy that filters the growing light into dancing patterns across the forest floor. I lift my enormous head, feeling the familiar weight of my skull, heavy with bone and muscle. My jaw alone weighs more than most of the creatures that share this ancient landscape. The movement sends a ripple through my body as I stretch, working out the stiffness that comes from sleeping pressed against the earth. My tail, thick as a tree trunk and nearly as long as my body, sweeps across the ground behind me, disturbing the carpet of fallen fronds and seed pods. The morning air carries a symphony of scents, each one telling its own story. My nostrils flare as I sample the chemical messages drifting on the breeze. There's the musky, herbaceous scent of Edmontosaurus herds somewhere to the east, their bodies generating warmth in the cool morning air. These duck-billed giants are my preferred prey, their flesh tender and their bones rich with marrow. The scent trail is perhaps 2 hours old, which means they've moved on from their night roosting spots but haven't traveled far. Closer to my position, I detect the sharper, more acrid smell of smaller theropods. Dromaeosaurs, most likely, their scent carrying the metallic tang of recent kills. They're no threat to me, but they're competitors for the same resources. Their presence means the hunting has been good in this area, which is information I file away for later use. These smaller predators are like shadows in my world, quick and clever, always ready to dash in and steal scraps from my kills. The ground beneath me vibrates with a low, almost subsonic rumble. It's not the earth itself moving, but something far more immediate and concerning. Storm clouds are building on the horizon, their dark masses pregnant with the promise of rain. The rumble I feel is thunder, still distant but growing closer. The atmospheric pressure is dropping, and I can sense it in the way the air seems to press against my scales. This time of year, storms come fast and hard, turning peaceful streams into raging torrents in a matter of minutes. I need to establish my priorities for the day before that storm arrives. My body temperature has dropped during the night, and I can feel the sluggishness that comes with being cold-blooded in a world where temperature regulation is a constant challenge. The debate among your future scientists about whether creatures like me were warm-blooded or cold-blooded misses the point entirely. I exist somewhere in between. My massive body holding heat like a stone holds warmth from the sun, but still dependent on external sources to maintain optimal function. Water is my first concern. The night has left me dehydrated, and I can feel the slight headache that comes from too little moisture in my system. My tongue, thick and muscular, runs across my lips, testing the air for the scent of fresh water. There's an oxbow lake not far from here, a crescent-shaped body of water left behind when the river changed course during last season's floods. The water there is usually clear and cool, perfect for drinking, and for the brief bath I'll need to clean the mud and debris from my scales. But water alone won't sustain me. My stomach, cavernous and demanding, sends up the familiar ache of hunger. I haven't eaten in 2 days, not since my last successful hunt, and my body is beginning to consume its own reserves. The fat stores around my tail and belly are shrinking, and I can feel the slight looseness in my skin where muscle mass has begun to break down. This is normal for a predator of my size, but it's also a warning. I need to kill something substantial today, something that will provide enough meat to last me through the next few days. The challenge is timing. The morning hours are ideal for hunting, when the herbivores are still sluggish from the night's coolness and haven't yet spread out across the vast floodplain. But I also need to consider the approaching storm. If I'm caught in the open when it hits, I'll lose valuable hunting time and potentially expose myself to dangers I'd rather avoid. My massive feet, each one armed with claws, as long as your forearm, grip the soft earth as I begin to rise. The movement is deliberate and careful, each muscle group engaging in sequence to lift my enormous bulk from the ground. Standing, I tower over the landscape, my head reaching nearly as high as the lower branches of the Araucaria trees. From this vantage point, I can see across the floodplain, taking in the network of streams and marshes that make this area so rich with life. The sun is climbing higher now, and I can feel its warmth beginning to penetrate the cool morning air. Soon, the temperature will rise enough to activate my metabolism fully, to bring my body to the peak efficiency needed for hunting. But for now, in these quiet moments before the day truly begins, I simply exist, a 7-ton apex predator in a world where size and strength determine survival. The morning calls to me with its promise of water, food, and the endless cycle of life and death that defines my existence. I am hungry, I am powerful, and I am ready to begin another day in the ancient world that belongs to creatures like me. Thirst at the Oxbow Lake. The journey to water is a pilgrimage I make every morning, my massive feet creating a rhythmic percussion against the earth with each step. The Oxbow Lake lies perhaps half a mile from my sleeping spot, a distance that would take one of your kind 20 minutes to cover. For me, with my ground-eating stride, it's a matter of minutes, but each step must be calculated, deliberate. My weight could easily snap a fallen log or punch through a thin crust of dried mud into the softer ground beneath. The path I follow is one I've worn myself over countless mornings, a highway of compressed earth and crushed vegetation that speaks to the routine nature of this journey. Other creatures have learned to use this path too, but only when I'm not present. The scent markers I've left along the way serve as a clear warning to anything that might consider this route a shortcut. This is my territory, and the trail to water is part of my domain. As I approach the lake, the air grows thick with moisture and the rich scent of aquatic life. The Oxbow is a remnant of the river's previous course, a crescent-shaped body of water that's been isolated from the main flow for several seasons now. Without the constant influx of fresh water, it's become a concentrated ecosystem, teeming with life that exists nowhere else in my territory. The water level has dropped since the last rains, exposing muddy banks that gleam like polished pottery in the morning light. My first step onto the bank sends a shiver through the ground, and I feel my massive feet begin to sink into the soft mud. The sensation is both satisfying and concerning. The cool mud feels good against my scales, helping to regulate my body temperature, but it also makes me vulnerable. Each step requires effort to pull my feet free, and the sucking sound of mud releasing its grip on my claws echoes across the water's surface. The prehistoric turtles are the first to notice my arrival. These aren't the small, harmless creatures you might imagine, but massive, armored beasts the size of dining tables. Their shells are thick and ridged, covered in a pattern of geometric plates that look like they were designed by some ancient craftsman. They watch me with eyes that seem far too intelligent for reptiles, calculating whether my presence represents a threat or simply an inconvenience. One of the larger turtles, its shell scarred from decades of survival, doesn't retreat as I approach. Instead, it positions itself between me and the deeper water, its massive head extended in what might be either a challenge or a negotiation. We've encountered each other before, this turtle and I, and there's a mutual respect between us. I could easily crush its shell with my jaws, but the effort would be significant, and the meat inside tough and stringy. The turtle knows this, just as it knows that I pose no real threat as long as it doesn't interfere with my drinking. The crocodilomorphs present a different challenge entirely. These are the true dangers of the water, predators that have perfected the art of ambush over millions of years. They're smaller than me, certainly, but in their element, they're every bit as deadly as I am on land. I can see several of them now, their eyes and nostrils barely breaking the surface of the water, watching me with the patience that only a crocodile can possess. As I lower my massive head toward the water, I'm acutely aware of how vulnerable this position makes me. My neck, thick and muscular as it is, represents my most exposed point. A well-placed bite from one of the larger crocodilomorphs could sever crucial blood vessels or damage the complex system of muscles and tendons that control my head movement. It's a risk I must take, but one I never take lightly. My ears, small and hidden among the scales behind my eyes, pivot constantly as I drink. Every sound is catalogued and analyzed. The splash of a fish jumping, the rustle of wind through the reeds, the distant call of a pterosaur wheeling overhead. Any of these could mask the approach of danger, and my survival depends on my ability to distinguish between the harmless and the threatening. The water is cool and slightly brackish, flavored with the minerals and organic matter that have concentrated in this isolated pool. I drink deeply, my throat working in powerful swallows that send ripples across the surface. The sensation is intensely satisfying, each gulp helping to rehydrate my massive body and clear the slight fog that dehydration brings to my thinking. As I drink, I become aware of the smaller life forms that call this lake home. Tiny fish dart between the submerged roots of water plants, their scales flashing silver in the filtered sunlight. Insects skate across the surface tension, their movements creating miniature wakes that spread outward in perfect circles. This is a world within a world, an ecosystem that exists in the shadow of giants like me. The largest of the crocodilomorphs finally makes its move, gliding silently through the water toward my position. It's not an attack, exactly, but a test of boundaries. The creature's approach is calculated and cautious, designed to gauge my reaction and establish the hierarchy of this shared space. I lift my head slowly, water dripping from my jaws, and fix the crocodilomorph with my gaze. The message is clear. I acknowledge your presence, but this is my time at the water. The standoff lasts only seconds, but in that time, an entire conversation takes place through posture, positioning, and the subtle language of predator behavior. The crocodilomorph accepts my dominance in this moment and retreats to a respectful distance, though I know it will return the moment I leave. This is the dance of survival, the constant negotiation between predators who share the same resources. My thirst finally satisfied, I begin the careful process of extracting my feet from the mud. Each step requires a deliberate effort, the suction of the mud making small popping sounds as I pull free. The turtle that had positioned itself between me and the water moves aside with dignified slowness, its ancient eyes following my movement with what might be relief or simple acknowledgement. As I turn to leave the water's edge, I carry with me not just the hydration my body needs, but also a renewed understanding of my place in this complex ecosystem. I am the apex predator, the king of this domain, but I am also just one thread in a web of life that connects every creature in this ancient world. Stalking the Hadrosaur Dawn Parade. The morning hunt begins with patience, that most essential virtue of any successful predator. From my elevated position near the lake, I can observe the daily ritual of the Edmontosaurus herds as they emerge from their night roosts and begin their slow procession toward the feeding grounds. They move like a river of flesh and bone, their duck-billed heads swaying gently from side to side as they sample the morning air for danger. These are not the lumbering, mindless creatures that your popular culture might suggest. The Edmontosaurus are intelligent, social animals with complex behaviors and an acute awareness of their environment. They communicate through a combination of low-frequency calls, body language, and chemical signals that I'm only beginning to understand. Their survival depends on their ability to detect threats like me, and they've evolved sophisticated strategies to avoid becoming my next meal. The herd I'm watching consists of perhaps 30 individuals, ranging from massive adults that rival my own size to juveniles no bigger than a modern horse. It's the juveniles that interest me most, not because I'm cruel, but because they represent the most efficient use of my hunting energy. A fully grown Edmontosaurus is a formidable opponent, armed with a powerful tail and the ability to deliver devastating kicks with their hind legs. The younger animals, while still dangerous, are less experienced and more likely to make the mistakes that I can exploit. I begin my approach through the fern thickets that border the feeding grounds, moving with a care that might seem impossible for a creature of my size. Each step is placed with precision, my massive feet finding purchase on solid ground while avoiding the dry branches and leaves that would announce my presence. The ferns are tall here, their fronds reaching nearly to my shoulders, providing cover that allows me to move relatively unseen. The scent of the herd grows stronger as I close the distance, a complex mixture of plant matter, musk, and the particular smell that comes from animals living in close proximity to each other. My nostrils flare as I analyze the information carried on the wind, sorting through the individual scent signatures to identify potential targets. There's a juvenile, perhaps 2 years old, that carries the slightly different scent of an animal that's been recently injured. Not seriously, but enough to make it a fraction slower than its companions. My approach must account for the wind direction, one of the most crucial factors in any successful hunt. The morning breeze is coming from the west, carrying my scent away from the herd, which gives me a significant advantage. But wind can shift without warning, and I must be prepared to adjust my strategy accordingly. I've learned through bitter experience that even the slightest change in air currents can turn a promising hunt into a complete failure. The communication between predator and prey is a complex dance that's been refined over millions of years. As I move closer to the herd, I'm acutely aware that somewhere among those grazing animals, there are individuals whose primary job is to watch for threats like me. These sentries position themselves at the edges of the herd, their heads raised and alert, scanning the surrounding vegetation for any sign of danger. They're the reason I must move with such care, the reason every step must be calculated and precise. From my position in the fern thicket, I can observe the social dynamics of the herd with the patience of a student studying a complex subject. The largest adult, a massive bull with scars along his flanks that speak of previous encounters with predators, maintains his position at the center of the group. His presence alone provides comfort to the other animals, a living reminder of the protection that comes from staying close to the herd. But it's the juveniles that draw my attention, particularly one that's wandered slightly away from the main group. This individual, perhaps emboldened by the apparent safety of the morning, has discovered a particularly rich patch of young ferns and is feeding with the single-minded focus that comes from finding unexpectedly good food. The distance between this animal and the nearest adult is perhaps 20 yards, a gap that represents opportunity for a predator like me. The mechanics of my attack must be perfect. There will be no second chance, no opportunity to correct a mistake once I've committed to the strike. My massive legs, each one a pillar of muscle and bone, must propel my 7-ton body forward with explosive force. The distance between my hiding place and the target is roughly 50 yards, a gap I can cover in seconds if everything goes according to plan. I begin the final phase of my approach, moving with the slow, deliberate care of a creature that has learned the value of patience. Each step brings me closer to the moment when stealth will give way to speed, when the careful planning of the hunt will be decided by split-second timing and raw physical power. My heart rate begins to increase, pumping blood to the muscles I'll need for the explosive burst of speed that will determine success or failure. The target juvenile continues to feed, oblivious to the danger that lurks just yards away. Its companions remain focused on their own feeding, trusting in the sentries to alert them to any threats. But the sentries are watching the open ground, the obvious approaches that most predators would use. They're not expecting an attack from the fern thicket, not prepared for the possibility that something of my size could move through the vegetation without detection. As I prepare to make my move, I emit a low-frequency growl, barely audible even to my own ears. This isn't a sound of aggression, but rather a signal, a call to the mate I know is positioned somewhere beyond the herd. We've hunted together before, and she understands the plan. While I attack from the east, she'll position herself to cut off the herd's retreat to the west, creating a pincer movement that will maximize our chances of success. The moment arrives with the sudden clarity that comes from hours of careful preparation. I explode from the fern thicket, my massive legs driving me forward with terrifying speed. The ground shakes beneath my feet as I charge, and the peaceful morning is shattered by the thunderous sound of my approach. The juvenile I've targeted looks up from its feeding, its eyes wide with terror as it realizes the danger it's in. But the herd's response is faster than I anticipated. The sentries react with the speed of animals whose survival depends on their ability to detect and respond to threats. Their alarm calls ring out across the feeding ground, a cacophony of sound that sends the entire herd into panicked motion. My target, instead of freezing in terror as I'd hoped, turns and runs with the desperate speed of an animal fighting for its life. The chase is brief but intense, my massive strides eating up the distance between us. But the juvenile has the advantage of a head start and the motivation that comes from mortal terror. It reaches the safety of the herd just as my jaws snap shut on empty air, the sound of my teeth clashing together, echoing across the now empty feeding ground. The lesson is clear and painful. Patience and planning are essential, but they're no guarantee of success. The herd disappears into the distance, their alarm calls fading as they put distance between themselves and the danger I represent. I'm left standing alone in the feeding ground, my massive chest heaving from the exertion of the failed hunt. But this failure teaches me something valuable about the nature of predation in this ancient world. Success requires not just strength and speed, but also the ability to learn from mistakes, to adapt strategies based on the responses of prey animals that are every bit as intelligent and determined to survive as I am determined to hunt them. Mid-morning heat, thermoregulation tactics. The sun climbs higher, transforming the cool morning air into something thick and oppressive. I can feel the change in my body as the temperature rises, my metabolism shifting gears like a massive engine warming up. But there's a delicate balance to maintain here, a careful dance between the heat I need to function efficiently and the dangerous levels that could overwhelm my system entirely. My retreat to the shade of the conifers is not a choice but a necessity. These ancient trees, with their thick trunks and broad canopies, provide the kind of shelter that makes survival possible in this increasingly hostile environment. The temperature difference between the open floodplain and the cool sanctuary beneath these giants is dramatic, perhaps 20 degrees or more. I can feel my scales beginning to cool as I settle into the dappled shadows, my enormous body finally able to release some of the heat it's been accumulating. The process of thermoregulation is far more complex than your future scientists will initially understand. I exist in a state that's neither fully warm-blooded nor cold-blooded, but something more nuanced, more sophisticated. My massive body acts as a thermal reservoir, storing heat during the cool hours and releasing it gradually as the day warms. But this system requires constant management, careful attention to the balance between heat gain and heat loss. As I settle into my resting position, I can feel my heart rate beginning to slow. The frantic pace of the morning hunt has left my cardiovascular system working overtime, pumping blood through the vast network of vessels that supply my 7-ton frame. Now, in the relative coolness of the shade, I can allow my body to return to its resting state, conserving energy for the challenges that lie ahead. The sensation of cooling is almost meditative, a gradual process that affects every part of my body. My muscles, which were tight and ready for action during the hunt, begin to relax. The scales along my back, which had been absorbing heat from the morning sun, start to release their thermal load into the cooler air. Even my breathing changes, becoming deeper and more regular as my body no longer needs to work as hard to maintain optimal temperature. From my position in the shade, I have an excellent view of the kill site where I last successfully hunted 3 days ago. The carcass of the young Triceratops I brought down is now little more than scattered bones and scraps of hide, but it continues to attract attention from a variety of smaller predators. The sight of these scavengers working over the remains of my kill provides a fascinating glimpse into the complex ecosystem that exists in the shadow of apex predators like me. The dromaeosaurs are the most persistent visitors to my abandoned kill site. These smaller theropods, no bigger than modern wolves, move with the quick, nervous energy of creatures that live by their wits. They're intelligent hunters in their own right, but they're also opportunistic scavengers who understand the value of following in the wake of larger predators. Their presence at my kill site is both expected and tolerated, as long as they maintain the proper respectful distance. Watching these smaller predators work is like observing a masterclass in efficient scavenging. They move in coordinated groups, with some individuals keeping watch while others feed. Their sharp claws and teeth are perfectly adapted for stripping meat from bones and cracking open smaller bones to access the marrow inside. They waste nothing, consuming parts of the carcass that would be beneath my notice, but represent valuable nutrition for animals of their size. The social dynamics among the scavengers are complex and fascinating. There's a clear hierarchy based on size and aggression, with the largest dromaeosaurs claiming the choicest portions, while smaller individuals wait their turn. But there's also cooperation, with different species working together to access parts of the carcass that would be impossible for any single animal to handle alone. My tolerance for these scavengers is based on a careful calculation of costs and benefits. Their presence at my kill site doesn't significantly reduce the value of the carcass for me, since I've already consumed the choice portions. In fact, their scavenging activity serves a useful purpose by cleaning up the remains and reducing the scent markers that might attract larger, more dangerous competitors. As long as they maintain their distance and show proper deference to my status as the apex predator, I have no reason to drive them away. But this tolerance has limits, and those limits are tested regularly. Occasionally, a particularly bold or desperate scavenger will approach too closely, either to my resting position or to fresh kill that I'm not yet finished with. These transgressions must be dealt with quickly and decisively, not out of malice, but to maintain the social order that keeps the ecosystem functioning smoothly. The heat continues to build outside my shaded sanctuary, and I can see the shimmer of rising air creating mirages across the open floodplain. The temperature out there is approaching levels that would be dangerous, even for a creature of my size and thermal adaptations. This is the time of day when most activity ceases, when the smart move is to find shelter and wait for the sun to begin its descent toward the western horizon. The metabolic debates that will rage among your future scientists about creatures like me miss the lived reality of what it means to exist as a massive predator in a world where temperature regulation is a constant challenge. I am neither fully warm-blooded nor cold-blooded, but something more complex, more adaptable. My body responds to environmental conditions with a sophisticated array of physiological and behavioral adaptations that allow me to thrive in conditions that would overwhelm simpler creatures. As the morning gives way to the heat of midday, I settle deeper into the shade, my massive body finding comfort in the cool earth beneath the conifer canopy. The scavengers continue their work at my old kill site, their movements becoming more languid, as they too feel the effects of the rising temperature. This is the rhythm of life in the ancient world, the careful balance between activity and rest, between the energy required for survival and the need to conserve resources for the challenges ahead. The shade provides more than just thermal relief. It offers a chance for reflection, for processing the lessons learned during the morning hunt. Each failure teaches me something new about the behavior of my prey, about the timing and tactics that separate successful hunts from missed opportunities. In the cool sanctuary of the conifer shade, I file away these lessons, preparing for the next opportunity to test my skills against the intelligence and survival instincts of the herbivores that share this ancient landscape. Territory check, scent posts, and roars. The patrol of my territory is a ritual as old as predation itself, a systematic survey of the boundaries that define my domain. As the morning heat begins to subside into the more manageable temperatures of early afternoon, I emerge from my shaded sanctuary to begin the essential work of territorial maintenance. This isn't merely about marking boundaries. It's about maintaining the complex web of chemical and auditory communications that keep potential rivals at bay and ensure my continued access to the resources I need to survive. The river bluffs that form the western edge of my territory provide an ideal vantage point for this work. These limestone cliffs, carved by countless seasons of flooding and erosion, rise nearly 30 feet above the surrounding floodplain. From their heights, I can observe the vast expanse of marshland, forest, and open grassland that falls within my domain. The view is both strategic and satisfying, a constant reminder of the kingdom I've carved out through strength, cunning, and the ability to defend what I've claimed. My first stop is a massive araucaria that stands sentinel at the edge of the bluff. This tree, ancient even by the standards of my world, bears the scars of countless marking sessions. Its bark is gouged and worn smooth in places where I've rubbed my jaw glands against its surface, leaving behind the chemical signatures that proclaim my ownership of this territory. The tree has become a monument to my presence, a living bulletin board that communicates my status to any creature capable of reading the olfactory messages I've left behind. The process of scent marking is both physical and chemical, involving specialized glands located along my jawline and behind my ears. These glands produce a complex mixture of hormones, pheromones, and other chemical compounds that carry information about my identity, my health, my reproductive status, and my claim to this territory. As I rub against the rough bark of the araucaria, I can feel the glands releasing their contents, adding fresh layers to the chemical narrative that has been building on this tree for months. The scent I leave behind is rich with information that other creatures can decode with varying degrees of sophistication. Fellow predators will recognize the chemical signature of an apex predator in his prime, a warning that this territory is occupied and defended. Prey animals will smell the presence of danger and adjust their behavior accordingly, perhaps choosing to feed elsewhere or increasing their vigilance when traveling through my domain. Even smaller scavengers will find valuable information in my scent marks, learning about my hunting patterns and the likelihood of finding fresh kills in various parts of my territory. But scent marking is only half of the territorial communication system. The other half involves the deep, resonant roars that I use to announce my presence across the vast distances of the floodplain. These aren't the angry roars of popular imagination, but rather sophisticated vocalizations that carry complex information across kilometers of terrain. The low-frequency components of my calls can travel much farther than higher-pitched sounds, penetrating through dense vegetation and carrying my message to any creature within range. As I position myself at the edge of the bluff, I take a deep breath and release the first of my territorial calls. The sound that emerges from my throat is both powerful and precisely controlled, a bass note so deep that it seems to emerge from the earth itself. The call begins in my chest, builds in my throat, and emerges as a sound that can be felt as much as heard. The reverberations travel through the ground, through the air, and through the water, creating a sonic landscape that proclaims my presence to everything within several kilometers. The response to my call is immediate and revealing. From the eastern edge of my territory comes an answering call, fainter but clearly audible, from a rival male who has been testing my boundaries for weeks. The tone of his response carries information about his size, his health, and his intentions. He's not quite ready to challenge me directly, but he's letting me know that he's aware of my presence and prepared to defend his own smaller territory, if necessary. From the north comes a different kind of response, the higher-pitched calls of a family group of smaller theropods, acknowledging my dominance and confirming their intention to avoid conflict. These communications are part of a complex social network that extends across the entire region, a system of acoustic signaling that helps maintain the delicate balance between competition and coexistence. As I continue my patrol along the bluff, I discover something that immediately captures my attention. Fresh scent marks on a tree that should bear only my own chemical signature. The smell is unmistakably that of the rival male whose call I heard earlier, and the freshness of the scent suggests that he was here within the last few hours. This is a direct challenge to my authority, a deliberate provocation that cannot be ignored. The discovery of rival scent marks triggers a cascade of physiological and psychological responses. My heart rate increases, pumping adrenaline through my system and preparing my body for potential conflict. My muscles tense, ready for the explosive action that might be required to defend my territory. My senses sharpen, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the intruder's continued presence. But the response to territorial challenges requires careful calculation, not just raw aggression. I must weigh the costs and benefits of immediate confrontation against the strategic advantages of delayed response. A direct challenge now would send a clear message about my willingness to defend my territory, but it would also consume energy that might be better saved for more pressing concerns. The rival's scent marks, while provocative, don't represent an immediate threat to my access to resources or my ability to hunt in this area. The decision matrix I run through in these moments is complex and instinctive, drawing on years of experience in territorial disputes. The rival male is clearly testing my boundaries, but he's doing so cautiously, leaving his marks in locations that are borderline rather than central to my territory. This suggests that he's not yet ready for a full confrontation, but is rather probing for weaknesses in my defenses. My response is measured and strategic. I thoroughly mark over his scent with my own, obliterating his chemical signature and replacing it with a fresh, strong marker of my own presence. The process is both practical and symbolic, a clear statement that this territory remains under my control and that challenges to my authority will be met with appropriate force. As I continue my patrol, moving from scent post to scent post along the established boundaries of my territory, I maintain a constant awareness of the acoustic landscape around me. The calls and responses of other creatures provide a real-time map of the social dynamics in the area, information that's crucial for understanding potential threats and opportunities. The work of territorial maintenance is never complete, never finished. It's a constant process of communication, negotiation, and occasional confrontation that defines the structure of predator society in this ancient world. Each scent mark renewed, each territorial call answered, each challenge met and resolved, contributes to the complex social fabric that allows multiple apex predators to coexist in the same general area, without destroying each other through constant warfare. As the afternoon wears on and my patrol nears completion, I'm satisfied that my territory remains secure and my boundaries respected. The rival male's testing has been noted and appropriately answered. The various scent posts have been refreshed and reinforced, and the acoustic network of territorial communication has been maintained. This is the foundation upon which my survival depends, the invisible infrastructure that supports my existence as an apex predator in a world where territory is everything. Noon hunt triumph over Triceratops. The heat of midday brings with it a peculiar clarity, a sharpening of the senses that comes when the world around you becomes still and focused. Most creatures seek shelter during these hours, but for a predator of my size and experience, the noon heat can provide unexpected opportunities. It's during these quiet hours that I discover the Clay Wallow, a muddy depression near the bend of a seasonal stream, and the half-grown Triceratops that has claimed it as temporary refuge from the oppressive temperature. The young Triceratops is perhaps 4 years old, no longer a vulnerable juvenile, but not yet possessing the full defensive capabilities of an adult. Its three-horned skull, while impressive, lacks the massive bone density that makes older individuals nearly invulnerable to predators like me. The frill behind its head, decorated with the distinctive pattern of holes and ridges that characterizes its species, is large enough to provide protection, but not so massive as to make the animal unwieldy in combat. From my concealed position in the dense vegetation that borders the wallow, I can observe my potential prey with the patience of a hunter who has learned the value of careful study. The Triceratops has positioned itself in the deepest part of the muddy depression, its massive body partially submerged in the cool clay. The mud serves multiple purposes. It provides relief from the heat, protection from biting insects, and a degree of camouflage that might fool less experienced predators. But I can see the animal's vulnerability in its choice of refuge. The Clay Wallow, while providing temporary comfort, has also created a tactical disadvantage. The soft, sucking mud that feels so pleasant against the Triceratops' skin will also impede its movement when the time comes to flee. Its powerful legs, capable of propelling its multi-ton body at surprising speeds across firm ground, will struggle to find purchase in the slippery clay. The approach requires meticulous planning. Unlike the failed hunt of this morning, this situation offers advantages that I must exploit with precision. The wind is in my favor, carrying my scent away from the wallow and toward the distant forest. The terrain provides excellent cover, with thick stands of flowering plants and low-growing conifers that can conceal my bulk until the moment of attack. Most importantly, the Triceratops has chosen a position that, while comfortable, limits its escape routes. I begin my stalk with the methodical patience that separates successful hunts from missed opportunities. Each step is calculated, each movement designed to bring me closer to striking distance without alerting my prey to the danger. The vegetation is thick enough to provide cover, but I must be careful not to disturb the larger plants in ways that might create suspicious movement patterns visible to the Triceratops. The distance between my initial position and the wallow is perhaps 80 yards, a gap that represents the difference between success and failure. Too far away, and the Triceratops will have time to extract itself from the mud and mount an effective defense or escape. Too close, and I risk premature detection, which would allow the animal to prepare for my attack or potentially call for help from other members of its species that might be in the area. As I close the distance, I can observe the Triceratops' behavior with increasing detail. The animal is not simply resting, but actively feeding on the water plants that grow around the edges of the wallow. Its massive beak, designed for cropping tough vegetation, works methodically as it processes the aquatic plants. This feeding behavior works in my favor, as it requires the animal to lower its head and focus its attention on the immediate area around its mouth, reducing its ability to scan for potential threats. The final approach requires a different kind of movement entirely. The careful, deliberate steps of the long stalk give way to the fluid, predatory grace that evolution has perfected over millions of years. I move like a shadow-given substance, my massive body somehow achieving a level of stealth that seems impossible for something of my size. Every muscle is coordinated, every movement purposeful, as I position myself for the explosive burst of speed that will determine the outcome of this hunt. The moment of attack arrives with the sudden inevitability of a thunderclap. I explode from my concealment, my powerful legs driving me forward with terrifying speed. The ground shakes beneath my feet as I charge, and the peaceful afternoon is shattered by the sound of my approach. The Triceratops looks up from its feeding, its eyes widening as it processes the reality of the danger bearing down on it. But unlike the failed hunt of this morning, this time everything goes according to plan. The Triceratops attempts to rise from the wallow, its powerful legs churning in the mud as it struggles to gain traction. But the clay that provided such pleasant relief from the heat now becomes a trap, the soft surface, offering no purchase for the desperate animal's claws. Instead of the quick escape that might have been possible on firm ground, the Triceratops finds itself wallowing helplessly as I close the final distance. The collision is tremendous, a meeting of multi-ton bodies that sends shockwaves through the ground and water alike. My jaws clamp down on the Triceratops' neck, just behind the protective frill, and I feel the satisfying crunch of bone and cartilage giving way under the pressure of my bite. The animal's struggles are fierce but brief, its movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated as the damage to its nervous system takes effect. The biomechanics of my killing bite are the result of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. My skull, massive and powerfully constructed, provides the leverage needed to generate crushing force. My teeth, more than 60 of them, are designed not just for cutting, but for gripping and crushing. Each tooth is curved and serrated, creating a series of cutting edges that can slice through bone as easily as flesh. The combined force of my bite, concentrated through these perfectly designed tools, creates a weapon that few creatures can survive. The Triceratops' death is neither quick nor clean, but it is inevitable. The damage to its neck disrupts the flow of blood to its brain and the signals from its nervous system to its muscles. Its struggles become weaker, more uncoordinated, until finally the massive body goes limp in my jaws. The hunt is over, and I have succeeded where this morning I failed. But success in hunting is only the beginning of the next phase of survival. The kill must be defended, the meat consumed before it spoils, and the energy gained from the hunt must be carefully managed to sustain me through the days ahead. As I drag the massive carcass from the wallow to firmer ground, I'm already planning the next stages of this ancient dance between predator and prey. The aftermath of the kill brings with it a complex mixture of sensations and emotions. There's the satisfaction of successful hunting, the relief of securing food for the coming days, and the physical exhaustion that comes from the explosive effort required to bring down prey of this size. My chest heaves as I catch my breath, steam rising from my scales, where the exertion has elevated my body temperature beyond the already oppressive heat of the day. Blood, still warm from the Triceratops' body, drips from my jaws and mingles with the mud of the wallow. The metallic taste fills my mouth, a flavor that triggers deep, instinctive responses related to feeding and survival. This is the taste of success, of life continued for another few days, of the eternal cycle of predation that has shaped life on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. Feeding hierarchy scavengers arrive. The scent of fresh blood carries far in the humid air of the floodplain, spreading like an invisible signal that draws creatures from across the landscape. Within minutes of my successful kill, I can sense the gathering of the scavengers, their presence announced by the subtle changes in the acoustic environment around me. The first to arrive are always the Dakota raptors, those swift and opportunistic predators whose survival depends on their ability to locate and exploit fresh kills before larger competitors can claim them. The Dakota raptors approach with the cautious respect that comes from understanding their place in the feeding hierarchy. These are not the mindless scavengers of popular imagination, but intelligent predators in their own right. capable of bringing down prey when the opportunity presents itself. However, they're also pragmatic enough to recognize that following in the wake of apex predators like me can provide more reliable access to food than hunting alone. I watch their approach with the calculating gaze of a predator who understands that every interaction with other species is a negotiation. The lead raptor, a scarred female whose experience shows in her careful movements, maintains a distance of perhaps 20 yards from my position. This is close enough to demonstrate her interest in the kill, but far enough away to avoid triggering my territorial aggression. Her behavior sets the tone for the rest of her pack, establishing the boundaries that will govern their access to the carcass. The social dynamics of scavenging are complex and fascinating, involving a careful balance of aggression, submission, and mutual benefit. The Dakota raptors position themselves in a loose semicircle around my kill, their body language communicating both desire for the meat and acknowledgement of my dominant status. Their heads are lowered slightly, their postures non-threatening, but their eyes remain fixed on the carcass with the intensity of creatures who know that their next meal depends on my tolerance. From the sky comes the next wave of scavengers, the pterosaurs whose ability to spot fresh kills from great distances makes them among the first to arrive at any feeding site. These flying reptiles, with their leathery wings and sharp beaks, represent a different kind of scavenging strategy. They're not interested in the choice cuts of meat that attract ground-based predators, but rather in the softer tissues, the organs, and the smaller scraps that larger animals might overlook. The largest of the pterosaurs, a magnificent creature with a wingspan that rivals the length of my body, circles overhead before landing at a respectful distance from the kill. Its approach is cautious but confident, the behavior of an animal that has learned to read the moods and intentions of ground-based predators. The pterosaur's presence adds another layer to the complex social dynamics of the feeding site, introducing an aerial element that must be factored into the ongoing negotiations over access to the carcass. But it's the arrival of the smaller mammals that truly demonstrates the complexity of the scavenging hierarchy. These creatures, no larger than modern house cats, emerge from the underbrush with the nervous energy of animals who know they're at the bottom of the food chain. Their survival depends on their ability to exploit the briefest windows of opportunity, to dart in and claim small morsels of meat, while the larger predators are distracted or sated. The decision of whom to tolerate and whom to drive away is one that I make based on a complex calculus of costs and benefits. The Dakota raptors, while competitors for the meat, also provide a valuable service by helping to clean the carcass and by alerting me to the approach of larger threats. Their presence is therefore acceptable, as long as they maintain proper deference to my status as the primary predator. The pterosaurs present a different calculation entirely. Their access to parts of the carcass that I'm not immediately interested in means that their scavenging doesn't significantly reduce the value of the kill for me. In fact, their consumption of the organs and softer tissues helps to preserve the meat that I do want by reducing the rate of decomposition. Their presence is not just tolerable but beneficial, a recognition that leads me to ignore their activities as long as they don't interfere with my own feeding. The small mammals occupy the lowest rung of the scavenging hierarchy, but they too have their place in the ecosystem. Their tiny size means that they consume only the smallest scraps, the fragments of meat and bone that would otherwise go to waste. They also serve as living cleanup crews, consuming the insects and other small creatures that are attracted to the carcass. Their presence is so minimal that it requires no active management on my part, though I remain aware of their movements through the peripheral vision that keeps me informed of all activity around the kill site. As I begin my own feeding, tearing into the rich muscle of the Triceratops' hindquarters, I'm constantly aware of the audience of scavengers waiting for their opportunities. The sound of my teeth shearing through flesh and bone creates a rhythm that seems to mesmerize the watching animals, their own hunger evident in the intensity of their gaze. They know that my feeding patterns will determine their own access to the carcass, and they watch my every movement for signs of satisfaction or distraction. The process of feeding is both mechanical and ritualistic, involving the careful consumption of the choicest portions of the kill. I begin with the hindquarters, where the largest concentrations of muscle provide the most energy per unit of effort. My teeth, designed for both cutting and crushing, make quick work of the tough hide and dense muscle tissue. Each bite yields pounds of meat that I swallow with powerful contractions of my throat muscles. But feeding is not just about consuming calories. It's also about maintaining the social order that governs the scavenging hierarchy. When one of the Dakota raptors edges too close to my position, drawn by the smell of fresh blood, I respond with a low growl that sends the animal scuttling back to a respectful distance. The correction is gentle but firm, a reminder that while I tolerate their presence, I will not permit challenges to my authority. The arrival of additional scavengers throughout the afternoon creates an ever-changing dynamic around the kill site. Each new arrival must be assessed and either accepted or rejected based on their species, their behavior, and their potential impact on the carcass. A young dromaeosaur that approaches with too much boldness finds itself on the receiving end of a warning snap from my jaws, a lesson in proper scavenging etiquette that it won't soon forget. As the day progresses and my immediate hunger begins to subside, I become more tolerant of the scavenger's presence. The Dakota raptors are permitted to approach closer to the carcass, though they remain careful not to feed from the same area where I'm working. The pterosaurs grow bolder, landing directly on the carcass to access the internal organs that I've exposed. Even the small mammals venture closer, their quick movements taking them in and out of the feeding area with the nervous energy of creatures who know they're pushing the boundaries of safety. The feeding hierarchy that emerges around my kill is a microcosm of the larger ecosystem, a demonstration of how multiple species can coexist and even benefit from each other's presence. The scavengers help to clean the carcass, reducing waste and preventing the buildup of carrion that might attract less desirable species. In return, they receive access to food that they could never obtain through their own hunting efforts. By late afternoon, as the heat begins to subside and the shadows grow longer, the feeding site has become a bustling center of activity. The various scavengers have established their own mini territories around the carcass, each species occupying its own niche in the complex ecosystem that has formed around my successful hunt. It's a reminder that in the ancient world, nothing is ever truly solitary, and even the most successful predators depend on the complex web of relationships that connect all life. Storm surge, flash flood survival. The first signs of the approaching storm come not from the sky, but from the earth itself. A subtle vibration travels through the ground, so low in frequency that it's felt rather than heard, warning of the atmospheric violence building on the horizon. The air pressure drops with a suddenness that makes my ears pop, and I can taste the metallic tang of electricity building in the atmosphere. These are the signs that every creature in the floodplain has learned to read. The advanced warning system that means the difference between life and death when the tropical storms of this ancient world unleash their fury. The sky darkens with a speed that seems almost supernatural, towering thunderheads building from scattered clouds into a wall of darkness that stretches across the entire western horizon. The temperature drops 10 degrees in as many minutes, and the wind begins to shift and swirl in patterns that speak of the massive atmospheric disturbance approaching. Lightning flickers in the distance, not yet close enough to pose a direct threat, but near enough to serve as a reminder of the raw power contained within those approaching storm cells. My position near the kill site, while excellent for defending my prize from scavengers, is dangerously exposed to the kind of flooding that these storms can produce. The seasonal creek that runs perhaps 100 yards from my location looks peaceful enough in its current state, a narrow stream of clear water meandering through banks lined with flowering plants and water-loving ferns. But I've seen what happens when the massive rainfall of a tropical storm combines with the runoff from the surrounding hills, transforming gentle streams into raging torrents capable of moving boulders and uprooting trees. The decision to abandon my kill, even temporarily, is not one I make lightly. The Triceratops carcass represents several days' worth of food, a valuable resource that I've expended considerable energy to obtain. But the approaching storm poses a threat that makes even the most valuable kill expendable. I've survived previous flash floods, and I know that the key to survival lies in reaching higher ground before the wall of water arrives. The retreat from the kill site is a strategic withdrawal, not a panicked flight. I move with purposeful haste toward the limestone bluffs that form the western edge of my territory, my massive feet finding purchase on ground that's beginning to soften as the first drops of rain begin to fall. Behind me, the scavengers that had been working over the carcass scatter in all directions, their own survival instincts overriding their desire for easy meat. The rain begins as scattered drops, each one the size of a small pebble, striking my scales with enough force to be felt through the thick armor of my hide. Within minutes, the scattered drops become a steady downpour, and then a deluge that transforms the world around me into a grey curtain of falling water. The sound of the rain is overwhelming, a constant roar that makes communication impossible and reduces visibility to a few yards in any direction. But it's not the rain itself that poses the greatest threat. The real danger comes from the massive volume of water that's falling on the hills and mountains that surround the floodplain. Every drop that strikes the earth begins an inexorable journey toward the lowest point in the landscape, and that journey inevitably leads to the network of streams and creeks that drain the region. The peaceful creek near my kill site is about to become the focus of a convergence of water that will transform it into something entirely different. The wall of water arrives with a sound like continuous thunder, a roar that can be heard even over the noise of the falling rain. I turn from my position on the bluff to see a brown, debris-filled torrent surging down the creek bed, carrying with it everything that was unable to escape its path. Trees that have stood for decades are uprooted and swept away like twigs. Boulders the size of my head roll along the bottom of the flood, their movement creating a grinding sound that speaks of the incredible forces at work. The transformation of the landscape is both swift and dramatic. The gentle creek becomes a raging river, its banks overflowing as the volume of water exceeds the capacity of the normal channel. The low-lying areas that were dry ground minutes before are now underwater, creating a temporary lake that stretches for miles in every direction. My kill site, along with the Triceratops carcass I worked so hard to obtain, disappears beneath the brown flood waters. But the flood brings unexpected opportunities along with its destruction. As the water level rises, it carries with it fish from the upstream reaches of the creek, species that normally inhabit the deeper pools and slower-moving sections of the waterway. These fish, suddenly out of their element in the fast-moving flood water, become easy prey for any creature quick enough to take advantage of their disorientation. From my elevated position on the bluff, I can see the silver flash of fish struggling against the current, their movements erratic and desperate as they try to find calmer water. Some of them are substantial, the size of modern salmon, and they represent a potential meal that could partially compensate for the loss of my Triceratops kill. The challenge lies in accessing them without exposing myself to the dangers of the flood. The rescue of the juvenile relative comes as a complete surprise, a reminder that even in the midst of natural disaster, the bonds of kinship can override self-preservation. The young Tyrannosaurus, perhaps 18 months old and still dependent on adult protection, has been caught in the flood while attempting to reach higher ground. I can see its massive head bobbing above the water, its powerful legs churning desperately as it tries to maintain its position against the current. The decision to help is instinctive, driven by genetic programming that prioritizes the survival of closely related individuals. I descend from the safety of the bluff, feeling the pressure of the flood water against my chest-high legs as I wade into the torrent. The current is incredibly strong, trying to sweep me downstream with the same force that's carrying trees and boulders. But my size and weight give me advantages that smaller creatures lack, allowing me to maintain my footing even in the fast-moving water. The rescue is accomplished through a combination of strength and careful positioning. I position myself upstream from the struggling juvenile, using my body as a breakwater that creates a pocket of calmer water. The young animal, exhausted from its fight against the current, allows itself to be guided toward the shore, where it can find purchase on the muddy bank and extract itself from the flood. The aftermath of the rescue leaves both of us exhausted and covered in mud, but alive and together on the safety of higher ground. The juvenile presses against my flank, seeking comfort and reassurance after its terrifying experience. The contact is both physically and emotionally satisfying, a reminder that even apex predators are not immune to the social bonds that connect individuals within a species. As the storm begins to subside and the flood waters start to recede, the landscape reveals the extent of the transformation that has taken place. The familiar geography of my territory has been altered, with new channels carved by the flood and old landmarks swept away or buried under tons of sediment. The process of recovery will take days or weeks as the ecosystem adapts to the changes wrought by the storm. The fish that were swept downstream by the flood now find themselves stranded in temporary pools and shallow areas, creating an unexpected bounty for any creature capable of taking advantage of their situation. The largest of these fish, a primitive species with thick scales and powerful jaws, provides a substantial meal that helps to compensate for the loss of my Triceratops kill. The taste is different from the meat I'm accustomed to, but the protein and energy are welcome after the stress and exertion of surviving the flood. The experience of the flash flood serves as a reminder of the constant challenges that define life in this ancient world. Survival depends not just on the ability to hunt and defend territory, but also on the capacity to adapt to sudden changes in the environment. The storm has reshaped the landscape, destroyed valuable resources, and created new opportunities, all within the space of a few hours. In this world of constant change, flexibility and quick thinking are as important as strength and size. Afternoon lulls skin, scales, and parasites. The aftermath of the storm brings with it a peculiar calm, a sense of the world settling back into its rhythms after the violent disruption of the flood. The air, washed clean by the torrential rain, carries scents with unusual clarity, and I can detect the subtle chemical signals that indicate the approach of my regular afternoon visitors. These are the early avialans, the primitive birds whose relationship with creatures like me represents one of the most fascinating partnerships in the ancient world. The first to arrive is a creature no larger than a modern crow, but with the intelligent eyes and purposeful movements of an animal that has learned to read the moods and intentions of much larger predators. Its feathers, iridescent in the filtered afternoon light, shimmer with colors that seem to shift and change as it moves. This is not the dull, utilitarian plumage of a creature focused solely on survival, but something more complex, more beautiful, suggesting that even in this harsh world, there's room for aesthetics and display. The approach of the avialans is cautious but confident, the behavior of creatures who have established a mutually beneficial relationship through countless previous encounters. They understand that my tolerance for their presence depends on their ability to provide a valuable service, and they've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate when I'm receptive to their attentions and when I prefer to be left alone. Today, exhausted from the stress of the flood and covered in mud and debris, I'm more than ready for the grooming services that these small creatures provide. I settle into a comfortable position on a patch of high ground, my massive body arranged to provide easy access to the areas where parasites are most likely to have taken hold. The positioning is both practical and ritualistic, a signal to the avialans that I'm ready to begin the ancient dance of mutual grooming. The sensation of the first bird landing on my back is barely perceptible, a weight so slight that it might be mistaken for a falling leaf. But I'm acutely aware of its presence, my nervous system registering the tiny claws that grip my scales and the delicate movements as the bird begins its work. The sensation is both strange and oddly soothing, a reminder of the complex network of relationships that exist between species in this ancient ecosystem. The process of parasite removal is meticulous and thorough, involving the careful examination of every scale, every fold of skin, every crevice where unwanted guests might have taken up residence. The avialans work with the precision of surgeons, their sharp beaks designed to extract parasites without damaging the skin beneath. They can detect the subtle chemical signals that indicate the presence of parasites, following scent trails that are invisible to my larger senses. The parasites themselves are a diverse collection of creatures, each one adapted to exploit a specific niche in the ecosystem of my body. There are the tick-like arthropods that attach themselves to the softer skin around my eyes and ears, feeding on blood and leaving behind irritating welts. There are the smaller, more mobile parasites that live among my scales, feeding on dead skin and secretions. Most annoying are the internal parasites that I can feel but cannot reach, creatures that have found their way into my digestive system and are now living as unwelcome guests in my body. The avialan's ability to detect and remove these parasites is nothing short of remarkable. They seem to possess an almost supernatural ability to locate parasites that I'm not even aware of, following subtle chemical cues and behavioral patterns that escape my notice. Their beaks, while small, are perfectly adapted for the delicate work of parasite extraction, sharp enough to pierce the protective shells of ticks and other arthropods, but gentle enough to avoid damaging my skin. The sensation of having parasites removed is intensely satisfying, a relief that goes beyond the mere physical removal of irritating creatures. Each parasite that's extracted represents a reduction in the constant low-level stress that comes from carrying unwanted passengers. The cumulative effect of having dozens or hundreds of parasites removed is a sense of well-being that affects my entire body, from the tips of my claws to the end of my tail. As the avialans work, I find myself reflecting on the nature of touch and sensation in my massive body. My scales, while they appear armor-like and insensitive, are actually quite sophisticated sensory organs. Each scale contains nerve endings that can detect pressure, temperature, and chemical changes. The pebbled texture of my integument isn't just for protection, but also for gathering information about the world around me. The sense of touch extends beyond mere physical sensation to include the social and emotional dimensions of contact with other creatures. The gentle pressure of the avialan's feet on my scales, the careful movements of their beaks as they work, the subtle vibrations that travel through my body as they move from one area to another, all of these create a complex sensory experience that's both practical and emotionally satisfying. The grooming session awakens memories of previous encounters, creating a dreamlike state where past and present blend together in a haze of sensory recollection. I remember the last mating season, when these same grooming behaviors played a crucial role in courtship and pair bonding. The mutual grooming between mates serves not just to remove parasites, but also to strengthen the social bonds that hold pairs together during the challenging period of nest building and egg incubation. The memory of my mate's touch is both vivid and bittersweet, a reminder of the cyclical nature of life in this ancient world. The breeding season comes and goes with the reliability of the changing weather patterns, but the bonds formed during those intense periods of cooperation and mutual dependence leave lasting impressions that shape behavior long after the immediate need for partnership has passed. As the grooming session continues, I allow myself to drift into a state that's somewhere between waking and sleeping, a relaxed awareness that's both restorative and meditative. The constant vigilance required for survival in this dangerous world rarely allows for such moments of peace, and I savor the opportunity to let my guard down, if only temporarily. The afternoon light filters through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns of shadow and brightness that play across my scales. The avialans continue their work with the patience of creatures who understand that thoroughness is more important than speed. They move systematically across my body, leaving behind a trail of cleanliness and relief that I can feel spreading through my nervous system. The symbiotic relationship between predator and groomer represents one of the most successful partnerships in the natural world, a demonstration of how cooperation can benefit both participants. The avialans receive easy access to food in the form of parasites, while I receive grooming services that would be impossible for me to perform alone. It's a relationship built on mutual benefit and sustained by generations of genetic programming that have refined the behaviors of both species. As the grooming session nears its end, I feel a profound sense of satisfaction and well-being. The parasites have been removed, my scales have been cleaned and polished, and my body feels lighter and more comfortable than it has in days. The avialans, their own hunger satisfied by the parasites they've consumed, begin to disperse, their work complete until the next time our paths cross. The brief nap that follows is one of the deepest and most restorative sleeps I've experienced in weeks. Free from the constant irritation of parasites and surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the post-storm afternoon, I allow myself to sink into a state of complete relaxation. Dreams come and go like shadows, mixing memories of past hunts with hopes for future success, creating a narrative that connects my individual existence to the larger story of survival and adaptation in this ancient world. Rival encounter, the display ritual. The scent reaches me before I see him. A complex chemical signature that speaks of strength, maturity, and challenge. It's the unmistakable scent of an adult male Tyrannosaurus, one whose size and confidence suggest he's reached the same apex status that I've worked years to achieve. The scent is fresh, perhaps only hours old, and it carries with it an undertone of deliberate provocation that makes my muscles tense and my heart rate increase. I rise from my resting position with the careful deliberation of a predator who knows that the next few minutes will determine the future of his territory. The rival is close, closer than any challenger has dared to come in months, and his presence represents a direct threat to everything I've built in this corner of the ancient world. My massive body, refreshed from the grooming session and the brief nap, responds to the challenge with the automatic preparation that millions of years of evolution have programmed into my species. The first sight of him is both impressive and intimidating. He emerges from the tree line like a force of nature, his 7-ton frame moving with the confident grace of a predator who has never known defeat. His scales, dark with hints of green and brown, are unmarked by the scars that tell the story of territorial battles. This is a younger male, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, who has reached his full size and strength but has not yet learned the lessons that come from facing an experienced opponent. The distance between us is perhaps 50 yards, close enough to assess each other's condition and intentions, but far enough to allow for the ritual displays that will determine whether this encounter ends in negotiation or violence. His posture is deliberately provocative, his massive head held high, his tail straight and rigid behind him. This is the stance of a challenger, a declaration of intent that cannot be ignored or misinterpreted. My response is immediate and instinctive. I draw myself up to my full height, my own head rising to match his, my powerful legs positioning my body to display maximum size and strength. The transformation is both physical and psychological, as the relatively relaxed predator of moments before becomes something harder, more dangerous, more focused on the immediate challenge to his dominance. The display begins with posture, the subtle language of body positioning that communicates strength, confidence, and willingness to fight. I angle my body slightly to present my broadest profile, emphasizing the massive chest and powerful shoulders that support my crushing bite. My head, with its enormous skull and battery of teeth, is held at an angle that maximizes its apparent size, while keeping my eyes fixed on those of my challenger. The rival responds with his own display, a mirror image of my posture that speaks of his own confidence and determination. His throat begins to flush with color, the normally subdued scales taking on vibrant reds and oranges that seem to pulse with his heartbeat. This is a display feature that I'd forgotten about, a relic of earlier evolutionary stages that still surfaces during intense confrontations between males. I feel my own throat responding, the blood vessels beneath my scales dilating to create a similar color display. The sensation is both strange and familiar, a genetic memory that connects me to countless generations of my ancestors who settled their disputes through ritualized combat. The colors serve multiple purposes, demonstrating health and vigor, while also making each combatant appear larger and more threatening. The vocal component of the display begins with my rival, a low-frequency roar that seems to emerge from the earth itself. The sound is so deep that it's felt as much as heard, a vibration that travels through the ground and into my bones. It's a sound designed to intimidate, to demonstrate the power of the lungs and chest muscles that produce it, and to announce to every creature within miles that a territorial dispute is in progress. My response is automatic and overwhelming, a roar that begins in my chest and builds in volume and intensity until it seems to fill the entire world. The sound that emerges from my throat is the product of years of experience and countless previous confrontations, a vocalization that carries information about my size, my health, and my absolute determination to defend my territory. The roar reverberates off the limestone bluffs, creating echoes that amplify and extend the sound until it seems to come from everywhere at once. The ground literally shakes beneath our feet as we exchange vocal challenges, each roar building on the last until the very air seems to vibrate with the intensity of our confrontation. Birds flee from the trees, smaller animals scatter in all directions, and even the insects seem to fall silent in the face of this titanic display of prehistoric power. The physical testing begins with careful, measured movements that test each other's reactions and defensive capabilities. My rival takes a step forward, his massive foot striking the ground with enough force to create a small crater in the soft earth. The movement is both a test and a threat, a way of demonstrating his willingness to escalate the confrontation while gauging my response. I respond with my own ground-shaking step, matching his movement with one of my own. The sound of our feet striking the earth creates a rhythm like distant thunder, a percussion that speaks of the massive forces at work in this ancient confrontation. Each step is carefully calculated, designed to demonstrate power while maintaining the option of retreat if the confrontation moves beyond display into actual combat. The test bite exchange represents the most dangerous phase of the display ritual, a moment when the line between ritualized combat and actual violence becomes dangerously thin. My rival opens his massive jaws, revealing the battery of teeth that make creatures like us the apex predators of our world. His bite is not directed at me, but at the air between us, a demonstration of the crushing power that he's prepared to use if necessary. My own response is equally dramatic, my jaws opening to reveal teeth that are longer, more worn, and more experienced than those of my challenger. The test bite I deliver to the air between us is accompanied by the distinctive sound of my teeth clashing together, a sound that has preceded the death of countless prey animals over the years. The message is clear. I am not just willing to fight, but I have fought before and emerged victorious. The dance of dominance continues, with foot-stomping displays that make the earth tremble beneath our massive frames. Each impact sends shockwaves through the ground, a demonstration of the incredible forces that our bodies can generate. The stomping serves multiple purposes, displaying our strength while also testing the ground for stability and potential advantages in the event that the confrontation escalates to actual combat. My rival's stomping is powerful and rhythmic, the movements of a creature in his prime who has never faced a serious challenge to his dominance. But there's something in his technique that speaks of inexperience, a slight hesitation in his movements that suggests he's operating on instinct rather than hard-won knowledge. This is valuable information, a glimpse into his psychological state, that could prove crucial if the display escalates to violence. My own stomping is more measured, more precise, the movements of a predator who has learned to conserve energy while still demonstrating overwhelming power. Each impact is calculated to produce maximum effect with minimum expenditure of energy, a lesson learned through years of territorial disputes and the understanding that even victories can be costly if not managed properly. The turning point comes when my rival attempts to close the distance between us, his massive body moving forward in what could be interpreted as either continued display or the beginning of an actual attack. The movement is bold and aggressive, the action of a young male who has perhaps never encountered an opponent willing to stand his ground. But it's also a crucial mistake, a miscalculation that reveals his inexperience with the subtle protocols of territorial negotiation. My response is swift and decisive, a sudden forward movement that brings my massive head within striking distance of his. The movement is not an attack, but rather a demonstration of speed and precision that stops just short of actual contact. The message is unmistakable. I am not intimidated by his size or his aggression, and I am prepared to escalate this confrontation to whatever level he chooses. The effect on my rival is immediate and dramatic. His forward movement stops as if he struck an invisible wall, his confident posture shifting to something more defensive, more uncertain. For the first time since the confrontation began, I see doubt in his eyes, a recognition that he may have underestimated the opponent he's chosen to challenge. The retreat, when it comes, is gradual and face-saving, the withdrawal of a predator who has learned a valuable lesson about the difference between size and experience. My rival begins to back away, his movements slow and deliberate, his posture maintained to avoid the appearance of complete submission. This is the behavior of an intelligent animal who understands that discretion is often the better part of valor. I allow him to withdraw without pursuit, my own posture shifting from aggressive display to watchful dominance. The message I'm sending is clear. I have won this confrontation, but I am not vindictive. He is free to leave with his dignity intact, as long as he acknowledges my superior claim to this territory. The final phase of the encounter involves the re-establishment of territorial boundaries through scent marking and vocal proclamation. I move to the trees that mark the edge of my territory, rubbing my scent glands against the bark with renewed vigor. The chemical messages I leave behind are stronger and more complex than usual, infused with the hormones and pheromones that come from successful territorial defense. My rival's final roar, delivered from a safe distance at the edge of the forest, is very different from the challenging vocalizations that began our encounter. This is the sound of acknowledgement, of a predator who has learned respect for a superior opponent. The tone carries information about his acceptance of my dominance and his intention to seek territory elsewhere. As the sound of his retreat fades into the distance, I find myself both satisfied and exhausted. The confrontation has lasted perhaps 30 minutes, but the intensity of the display has drained energy reserves that will take days to fully replenish. This is the hidden cost of territorial dominance, the constant expenditure of energy required to maintain status in a world where challenges can come from any direction at any time. The aftermath of the encounter brings with it a complex mixture of emotions and physical sensations. There's the satisfaction of successful territorial defense, the relief of avoiding actual combat, and the renewed confidence that comes from demonstrating continued dominance. But there's also the recognition that challenges like this will continue throughout my life, that the price of apex predator status is eternal vigilance and the willingness to face down any threat to my position. The scent markers I've refreshed will serve as a reminder to other potential challengers of what they can expect if they choose to test my dominance. The chemical signatures I've left behind carry information about my health, my strength, and my willingness to defend my territory with violence if necessary. This is the language of predator diplomacy, the complex system of chemical communication that helps maintain the delicate balance of territorial boundaries. Dusk courtship calls. The approaching dusk brings with it a transformation in the acoustic landscape of the floodplain. a shift from the practical communications of territorial maintenance to something more primal, more fundamental to the continuation of my species. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, I feel the ancient urge to reach out across the vast distances of my territory, to send forth the deep, resonant calls that might attract a mate. The timing of these calls is crucial, synchronized with the natural rhythms of the day and the season. The approaching evening provides optimal conditions for long-distance communication, as the cooling air creates atmospheric conditions that allow low-frequency sounds to travel farther and with greater clarity. The reduced activity of daytime creatures also means less acoustic interference, creating a quiet canvas upon which my calls can be painted with maximum effect. I position myself at the highest point of the limestone bluffs, a natural amphitheater that will amplify and direct my calls across the maximum possible distance. The elevation provides not just acoustic advantages, but also the psychological boost that comes from calling from a position of strength and dominance. From this vantage point, I can survey the vast expanse of my territory while sending forth the vocal signals that announce my presence to any potential mate within range. The first call begins deep in my chest, a low-frequency vibration that builds in intensity as it travels up through my throat and emerges as a sound that seems to come from the earth itself. This is not the aggressive roar of territorial defense, but something more complex, more musical, a vocalization that carries information about my fitness, my health, and my readiness to engage in the complex behaviors of courtship and mating. The sound that emerges is both powerful and surprisingly nuanced, a bass note that contains subtle variations in pitch and tone that convey specific information to any female within range. The call announces my location, my size, my health status, and my genetic fitness, all encoded in the complex acoustic signature that evolution has refined over millions of years. It's a sound that can travel for miles, penetrating through dense vegetation and carrying across bodies of water with remarkable clarity. The response, when it comes, is faint but unmistakable, a distant answering call that makes my heart race with anticipation. The sound carries across the evening air from somewhere to the southeast, perhaps 3 or 4 miles away, the voice of a female who has heard my call and chosen to respond. The acoustic signature tells me that she's mature, healthy, and potentially receptive to courtship, information that sends a surge of excitement through my massive frame. The exchange of calls that follows is like a conversation conducted across vast distances, each vocalization building on the last, to create a complex dialogue of attraction and assessment. Her calls provide information about her location, her size, and her reproductive status, while my responses communicate my continued interest and my willingness to travel to meet her. The conversation is both practical and romantic, a negotiation that will determine whether our paths will cross in the coming days. As the calls continue, I find myself transported by memories of previous mating seasons, flashbacks to the intense period of courtship and pair bonding that represents the culmination of my reproductive cycle. The memory of my last successful mating is vivid and powerful, a reminder of the complex behaviors and emotions that surround the creation of new life in this ancient world. The flashback carries me to a sandy riverbank where I once participated in the elaborate ritual of nest construction, the cooperative effort that marks the beginning of the reproductive process. The memory is both physical and emotional, recalling the sensation of working alongside a mate to create the perfect environment for our offspring. The nest site was carefully chosen, positioned above the floodline, but close enough to water to provide the humidity needed for proper egg development. The process of nest building was a revelation in cooperation, a demonstration of how 2 apex predators could work together toward a common goal. The excavation of the nest bowl required the coordinated effort of both partners, our powerful claws and tails working in harmony to create a depression in the sand that would cradle our future offspring. The careful layering of vegetation, the precise arrangement of materials to provide both insulation and drainage, the constant monitoring of temperature and humidity, all of these tasks required a level of cooperation that transformed our relationship from temporary alliance to something deeper and more meaningful. The memory of egg-laying is particularly vivid, the culmination of weeks of courtship and preparation. The eggs themselves, each one roughly the size of a football, represented the continuation of our genetic line, the physical manifestation of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The careful positioning of each egg within the nest, the constant monitoring of their development, the shared responsibility for their protection, these memories create a powerful, emotional resonance that influences my behavior even now. The calls continue as darkness begins to fall, each exchange adding new layers to the complex courtship ritual. The female's responses indicate a growing interest, a willingness to consider the possibility of partnership in the coming breeding season. Her calls carry information about her previous reproductive success, her territorial holdings, and her assessment of my own fitness as a potential mate. The acoustic landscape of the evening is transformed by our calling, the deep bass notes creating a sonic environment that affects every creature within range. Other predators fall silent, recognizing the significance of the sounds they're hearing. Prey animals become more alert, understanding that the presence of courting predators creates both danger and opportunity in the complex ecosystem of the floodplain. As the conversation continues, I begin to plan the logistics of a potential meeting. The distance between us is substantial, requiring careful consideration of travel routes, territorial boundaries, and the timing of any attempt to rendezvous. The female's territory, based on the direction of her calls, lies beyond the river system that forms the eastern boundary of my own domain. Any meeting would require me to traverse potentially hostile territory, crossing the domains of other predators and navigating the complex political landscape of apex predator society. The anticipation builds with each exchange, the possibility of successful courtship creating a sense of excitement that permeates my entire being. The breeding season represents the culmination of everything I've worked toward, the justification for all the energy expended in territorial defense and resource acquisition, the opportunity to pass on my genetic legacy, to contribute to the continuation of my species, creates a motivation that transcends the simple survival instincts that govern most of my existence. The calls gradually fade as the evening progresses, each participant apparently satisfied with the information gained from the exchange. The female's final call carries a note of acceptance, a subtle change in tone that suggests she's receptive to the possibility of future contact. The sound creates a sense of hopeful anticipation that will influence my behavior in the days to come. As full darkness settles over the floodplain, I remain in position on the limestone bluff, savoring the memory of the evening's vocal exchange. The possibility of successful courtship adds a new dimension to my existence, a reminder that even apex predators are subject to the fundamental drive to reproduce and ensure the continuation of their species. The breeding season approaches, and with it, the opportunity to participate in the ancient dance of courtship and mating that has shaped life on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. The stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, their light reflecting off the water of the distant river and creating a scene of surprising beauty. In this moment of quiet anticipation, I feel connected not just to the immediate possibilities of the approaching breeding season, but to the vast evolutionary heritage that has shaped my existence. The calls that echoed across the evening air were not just my own, but the voices of countless generations of predators who have stood on similar bluffs, sending forth similar calls, participating in the eternal cycle of life that connects all living things. Nightfall navigation, moonlit marshlands. The transition from day to night in the ancient world is not the gradual dimming that your modern eyes might expect, but a dramatic transformation that reveals an entirely different ecosystem. As the last traces of sunlight fade from the western sky, the marshlands come alive with a symphony of sounds and scents that speak of a parallel world, one that exists in the shadows and emerges only when darkness provides its protective cover. My eyes, adapted through millions of years of evolution for both diurnal and nocturnal hunting, begin their automatic adjustment to the changing light conditions. The pupils dilate to capture every available photon, while specialized cells in my retina shift their sensitivity to make maximum use of the starlight and moonlight that now provide the only illumination. The transformation is gradual but profound, revealing details of the landscape that were invisible only moments before. The moon, nearly full and riding high in the clear sky, casts its silvery light across the marshlands, creating a landscape of stark contrasts and deep shadows. The palm crowns that dot the wetlands stand out against the star-filled sky like the silhouettes of ancient sentinels, their fronds moving gently in the night breeze. The water reflects the moonlight in broken patterns, creating pathways of light that shift and change with every ripple. The decision to hunt at night is not taken lightly. While my size and strength make me a formidable predator at any hour, the darkness brings its own set of challenges and opportunities. The prey animals that emerge after sunset are different from those that dominate the daylight hours, requiring different hunting strategies and offering different rewards. The night hunters are often more alert, more cautious, their survival dependent on their ability to navigate a world where every shadow might conceal a predator. The Thescelosaurus that I'm tracking through the marshland represents the perfect target for nocturnal hunting. These small bipedal herbivores, roughly the size of a large dog, emerge from their daytime hiding places to feed on the tender shoots and roots that grow in the shallow water. Their feeding behavior makes them predictable, but their alertness and speed make them challenging prey that requires patience and precision to capture successfully. The tracking begins with sound rather than sight, the subtle splashing and rustling that indicates the presence of feeding animals somewhere in the darkness ahead. My ears, small but sensitive, pivot constantly as I move through the marsh, sorting through the complex acoustic environment to isolate the sounds that indicate potential prey. The night is filled with sound, the chirping of insects, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, the splash of fish jumping in the deeper pools, but beneath this cacophony, I can detect the distinctive sounds of Thescelosaurus movement. The approach requires a different kind of stealth than daytime hunting. In the darkness, visual detection is reduced, but the other senses become more acute. The splashing of my feet through the shallow water, normally a minor concern, becomes a critical factor that could alert prey to my presence. Each step must be placed with exquisite care, testing the bottom for solid footing, while minimizing the disturbance to the water's surface. The marshland environment presents unique challenges for a predator of my size. The water depth varies unpredictably, creating areas where I can move with relative ease alongside deeper channels that could pose problems for my massive frame. The vegetation is dense and often deceptive, with seemingly solid ground giving way to deeper water or soft mud that could trap my feet. The navigation requires constant attention and adjustment, making the hunt as much about environmental awareness as about prey detection. The scent trail of the Thescelosaurus is faint but distinctive, a musky odor that carries information about the animal's health, diet, and recent activities. The trail weaves through the marsh in a pattern that suggests systematic feeding, the animal moving from one productive feeding area to another in a route that has probably been used for days or weeks. This predictability is an advantage that I can exploit, but it also suggests that the animal is familiar with this terrain and will be difficult to surprise. The first glimpse of my prey comes as a shifting shadow against the moonlit water, a small form that moves with the jerky, alert movements characteristic of small herbivores. The Thescelosaurus is feeding in a shallow area where water plants grow in abundance, its head down as it searches for the choice roots and shoots that make up the bulk of its diet. The animal's posture and behavior suggest that it's relaxed, focused on feeding rather than watching for predators. The final approach requires the kind of patience that separates successful night hunters from those who go hungry. The distance between my position and the feeding Thescelosaurus is perhaps 30 yards, close enough to launch an attack, but far enough to require perfect timing and execution. The shallow water between us provides little cover, but the darkness and the animal's focus on feeding create a window of opportunity that I must exploit with precision. The attack, when it comes, is swift and decisive. I explode from my concealment with a burst of speed that sends water flying in all directions, my massive legs driving me forward with terrifying velocity. The Thescelosaurus looks up from its feeding just as my jaws close around its body, the hunt ending in a matter of seconds with the satisfying crunch of a successful kill. The aftermath of the hunt brings with it a profound sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. The night hunt has tested different skills than daytime predation, requiring enhanced use of hearing, smell, and touch to compensate for the reduced visual acuity. The successful capture of prey in these challenging conditions demonstrates the adaptability that has made my species so successful in the diverse environments of the ancient world. As I consume my prey, the night sounds of the marshland continue around me, creating an acoustic backdrop that speaks of the complex ecosystem that thrives in the darkness. The insects maintain their constant chorus, a sound that has probably remained unchanged for millions of years. The distant calls of nocturnal birds add their own notes to the symphony, while the splash of fish and the rustle of small mammals create a soundscape that's both alien and familiar. The moonlight transforms the marshland into a landscape of ethereal beauty, the silver light creating patterns and shadows that seem to shift and change with every movement of the water. The volcanic glow on the distant horizon adds an orange accent to the predominantly silver and black palette, a reminder of the geological forces that shape this ancient world. The combination of moonlight and volcanic glow creates a scene that's both peaceful and otherworldly, a glimpse into a time when the earth was young and the future was still being written. The night hunt has provided more than just nutrition. It has offered a connection to the nocturnal world that exists parallel to the daytime ecosystem. The successful adaptation to nighttime hunting demonstrates the versatility that has allowed my species to thrive in diverse environments and exploit different ecological niches. As I settle into a comfortable position to digest my meal, I'm reminded that survival in the ancient world requires not just strength and size, but also the ability to adapt to changing conditions and exploit every available opportunity. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, providing a constant backdrop to the ever-changing drama of life and death that plays out on the earth below. In this moment of quiet satisfaction, with the taste of fresh meat still in my mouth and the sounds of the marshland creating a peaceful symphony around me, I feel connected to the vast web of life that includes every creature from the smallest insect to the largest predator. The night hunt has been successful, but it's also been a reminder of the complex relationships that bind all living things together in the eternal struggle for survival. Breeding season begins, finding a mate. The weeks pass with the measured rhythm of seasons changing, and with them comes the unmistakable transformation that signals the beginning of the breeding season. The air itself seems different now, thick with chemical signals that speak to the most fundamental drive of any living creature, the imperative to reproduce and ensure the continuation of the species. My body responds to these atmospheric changes with a cascade of hormonal shifts that affect everything from my metabolism to my behavior, preparing me for the complex challenges of courtship and mating. The pheromone-laden air carries messages from across the vast expanse of the floodplain, chemical signatures that tell stories of receptive females, competing males, and the complex social dynamics that govern reproductive success in the world of apex predators. Each breath brings new information, updates on the reproductive status of potential mates, and the movements of rival males who might challenge my access to breeding opportunities. The transformation in my own body is profound and unmistakable. The scent glands along my jaw and neck become more active, producing the complex mixture of chemicals that will announce my readiness to mate to any female within range. My coloration subtly shifts, the normally muted tones of my scales taking on richer, more vibrant hues that speak of health and genetic fitness. Even my vocalizations change, developing the deeper, more resonant tones that will carry my courtship calls across the vast distances of my territory. The search for a suitable mate begins with the systematic exploration of the boundaries of my territory and the regions beyond. This is not the focused hunting of previous days, but a different kind of tracking, one that follows scent trails and vocal cues rather than the physical signs of prey animals. The female whose calls I heard during the evening courtship sessions has not been heard from in several days, suggesting that she may have moved on or found another mate, forcing me to expand my search to new areas. The discovery of fresh scent markers along the riverbank fills me with excitement and anticipation. The chemical signature is unmistakably that of a mature female, one whose scent carries the subtle indicators of receptivity and reproductive readiness. The trail is fresh, perhaps only hours old, and it leads upstream along the river's edge, through terrain that's familiar enough to navigate but different enough to require careful attention. The female's trail tells a story of deliberate movement, not the random wandering of an animal in search of food, but the purposeful travel of a creature with specific objectives. The scent markers she's left behind are strategically placed, positioned to provide maximum coverage, while also testing the responses of any males who might encounter them. This is the behavior of an experienced female, one who understands the complex dynamics of courtship and is actively participating in the process of mate selection. The first visual contact comes as a glimpse of movement through the dense vegetation that lines the riverbank. She's massive, perhaps slightly smaller than me, but carrying herself with the confidence of a predator in her prime. Her scales show the subtle scarring that speaks of successful territorial defense and survival through multiple breeding seasons. This is not a young female seeking her first mate, but an experienced partner who will bring her own strengths and knowledge to any potential pairing. The courtship dance that follows is unlike anything else in the natural world, a display of power and grace that transforms two apex predators into partners in the ancient ritual of reproduction. The dance begins with careful approaches, each of us testing the other's intentions and receptivity. The movements are deliberate and stylized, following patterns that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. The thunderous footfalls that accompany our dance create a rhythm that seems to resonate through the earth itself. Each step is calculated not just for its physical impact, but for its acoustic and emotional effect. The sound of our feet striking the ground announces to every creature within miles that a courtship is in progress, a declaration that carries implications for the entire ecosystem. The intertwining of our tails represents the most intimate and vulnerable phase of the courtship ritual. These massive appendages, each one capable of delivering crushing blows to enemies or prey, become instruments of gentle contact and communication. The sensation of her tail wrapping around mine creates a connection that's both physical and emotional, a moment of trust and vulnerability that transforms the relationship from potential conflict to partnership. The assessment of mate quality is a complex process that involves all of my senses and draws on years of experience in evaluating the fitness of potential partners. Her size and strength are obvious advantages, suggesting that she's successfully competed for territory and resources throughout her adult life. The condition of her scales, the clarity of her eyes, the power of her movements, all of these factors contribute to an overall assessment of her genetic fitness and her potential as a mother to our offspring. But beyond the physical attributes, there are subtler qualities that speak to her suitability as a mate. Her responses to my courtship displays demonstrate intelligence and experience, the ability to read and respond to complex social cues. Her scent carries information about her health, her reproductive history, and her genetic compatibility with my own lineage. The combination of these factors creates a profile that suggests she would be an ideal partner for the challenges of reproduction and offspring care. The selection process is mutual, with each of us evaluating the other's fitness and suitability. Her own displays are designed to demonstrate her health, strength, and reproductive potential, while also testing my responses to various stimuli. The courtship becomes a sophisticated negotiation, with each participant gathering information while also presenting themselves in the most favorable light. The sensory experience of courtship is overwhelming in its intensity and complexity. The visual display of her powerful movements, the sound of her calls and responses, the scent of her pheromones, the physical sensation of contact during the dance-all of these elements combine to create an experience that engages every aspect of my consciousness. The courtship transcends the purely physical to become something more profound, a connection that speaks to the deepest biological and emotional drives. The chemistry of attraction operates on multiple levels, from the immediate physical responses triggered by pheromones to the complex psychological processes involved in partner assessment. The hormonal changes that accompany courtship affect not just my reproductive system, but my entire physiology, creating a state of heightened awareness and sensitivity that enhances every aspect of the experience. The territorial considerations of mating add another layer of complexity to the courtship process. The establishment of a shared territory or the negotiation of access rights requires careful consideration of resources, defensive positions, and the potential for conflict with other predators. The female's own territorial holdings must be evaluated and potentially integrated with my own, creating a larger domain that can support both partners and their eventual offspring. The successful conclusion of the courtship ritual brings with it a sense of accomplishment and anticipation that's unlike anything else in my experience. The formation of a mating pair represents not just the satisfaction of reproductive urges, but the creation of a partnership that will face the challenges of nest construction, egg incubation, and offspring care. The bond that's formed during courtship will be tested and strengthened through the trials that lie ahead. The immediate aftermath of successful courtship is characterized by a period of heightened cooperation and mutual attention. The aggressive independence that characterizes most of my existence gives way to a different kind of behavior, one that prioritizes the needs of the partnership over individual concerns. The transformation is both behavioral and emotional, creating a temporary but profound shift in priorities and motivations. As the courtship concludes and we begin to move together toward the next phase of the reproductive cycle, I'm reminded of the fundamental importance of these behaviors in the continuation of life itself. The complex ritual we've just completed represents the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary refinement, a dance that has been performed by countless generations of predators who have contributed to the ongoing story of life on Earth. The breeding season has begun, and with it, the opportunity to participate in the eternal cycle of reproduction and renewal that defines the existence of all living things. Nest engineering: building a sandy cradle. The selection of the perfect nest site is a decision that will influence the survival of my offspring for months to come, a choice that requires careful consideration of drainage, temperature, protection from predators, and accessibility for the parent birds who will guard the eggs through their vulnerable incubation period. The search for this ideal location has taken my mate and me across miles of terrain, evaluating dozens of potential sites before settling on a gently sloping sandbar that rises above the seasonal floodline of the river. The sandbar represents the perfect compromise between the various factors that must be balanced in nest construction. Its elevation provides protection from the flash floods that can devastate lower-lying areas, while its sandy composition offers excellent drainage and the thermal properties needed for proper egg incubation. The location is defensible, with clear sight lines in all directions and multiple escape routes should the need arise to abandon the nest quickly. The engineering project that follows is far more complex than the simple hole digging that casual observers might imagine. The creation of a proper nest requires the coordinated excavation of thousands of cubic feet of sand and organic material, shaped and arranged to create the optimal environment for egg development. The work begins with the careful removal of the surface vegetation, clearing away the grasses and small plants that have colonized the sandbar. The excavation itself is a marvel of prehistoric engineering, accomplished through the coordinated efforts of both parents working together toward a common goal. My powerful claws, each one as long as a human forearm, are perfectly adapted for this work, capable of moving enormous quantities of sand with each stroke. The scraping motion sends cascades of golden sand flying in all directions, gradually revealing the bowl-shaped depression that will cradle our future offspring. The dimensions of the nest are carefully calibrated to accommodate the size and number of eggs we expect to lay. The bowl itself is roughly 6 feet in diameter and 3 feet deep, with gently sloping sides that will provide support for the eggs while allowing for proper air circulation. The shape is not arbitrary but follows patterns that have been refined over millions of years of evolution, optimized for the specific needs of developing Tyrannosaurus embryos. The layering of organic material represents the most critical phase of nest construction, requiring knowledge and skill that's passed down through generations of successful parents. The bottom layer consists of coarse vegetation, thick stems and leaves that will provide structural support and allow for drainage of excess moisture. This foundation must be strong enough to support the weight of the eggs while still allowing air and water to move freely through the nest structure. The middle layer is composed of finer organic material, leaves, and plant matter that will decompose slowly over the course of the incubation period. This decomposition is not accidental but essential, as the biological processes involved generate the heat needed to maintain optimal egg temperature. The selection of materials for this layer requires careful consideration of decomposition rates, heat generation, and the chemical byproducts that will affect the developing embryos. The final layer consists of the finest materials available, soft grasses and delicate plant fibers that will provide a gentle cushion for the eggs, while allowing for the precise temperature regulation needed for successful incubation. The arrangement of this material is almost artistic in its precision, with each strand positioned to contribute to the overall thermal and structural properties of the nest. The packing of the nest material is accomplished through the careful use of my powerful tail, the thick appendage serving as both tool and measuring device. The motion is rhythmic and deliberate, each impact compacting the organic material to the precise density needed for optimal function. Too loose, and the nest will not generate sufficient heat. Too tight, and air circulation will be impeded, potentially suffocating the developing embryos. The temperature regulation system that emerges from this careful construction is remarkably sophisticated, rivaling the engineering achievements of much more advanced civilizations. The decomposing organic matter generates heat through bacterial action, while the layered structure provides insulation and thermal mass. The sandy substrate conducts heat evenly throughout the nest, while the surface materials allow for fine-tuning of temperature through the addition or removal of insulating layers. The defense of the nest site begins even before construction is complete, as the activities of nest building attract the attention of various scavengers and opportunistic predators. The oviraptorids are among the most persistent threats, their intelligence and egg-stealing behavior making them a constant concern during the construction phase. These smaller theropods understand the value of fresh eggs and are skilled at exploiting any momentary lapse in vigilance. The encounter with the curious oviraptorids provides an early test of our defensive strategies. A pair of these smaller predators approaches the nest site with the cautious boldness of creatures who have learned to exploit the opportunities created by larger animals. Their interest in our construction project is unmistakable, their behavior suggesting that they're already planning their approach to the eggs once they're laid. The response to this threat is swift and coordinated, demonstrating the protective instincts that will govern our behavior throughout the incubation period. My mate and I position ourselves between the oviraptorids and the nest, our massive bulk serving as an effective deterrent. The threat display that follows is brief but decisive, our combined vocalizations and aggressive posturing sending the would-be egg thieves retreating to a safer distance. The completion of nest construction brings with it a profound sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The structure we've created represents hours of coordinated effort and the application of instinctive knowledge that connects us to countless generations of successful parents. The nest stands as a testament to the sophisticated behaviors that have evolved to ensure the survival of our species, a prehistoric marvel of engineering that will serve as the foundation for the next generation. The final inspection of the completed nest reveals a structure that's both functional and beautiful, a carefully crafted environment that will provide the optimal conditions for egg development. The smooth curves of the bowl, the precise arrangement of the organic layers, the careful attention to drainage and ventilation, all of these elements combine to create a nest that's perfectly adapted to the needs of developing Tyrannosaurus embryos. The positioning of the nest within the larger landscape demonstrates the strategic thinking that governs reproductive behavior in apex predators. The site provides excellent visibility for detecting approaching threats, while the surrounding terrain offers multiple defensive positions and escape routes. The proximity to water ensures that the parents will have access to the resources needed during the long weeks of incubation, while the elevation protects against the flooding that could destroy months of careful preparation. As we settle into position around the completed nest, preparing for the egg laying that will soon follow, I'm struck by the transformation that has occurred in our relationship and our priorities. The independent hunters who came together for courtship have become partners in the most fundamental task of any living creature, ensuring the survival of the next generation. The nest we've built together represents not just a physical structure, but a commitment to the future and a tangible expression of the biological drives that have shaped life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. The engineering project is complete, but the real work is just beginning. The nest will serve as the center of our existence for the next several months, the focal point around which all other activities will revolve. The success of our reproductive effort depends not just on the quality of the nest we've built, but on our ability to defend it, maintain it, and adapt to the challenges that lie ahead. The sandy cradle we've created will soon hold the future of our species, and with it, the hopes and dreams of parents who have invested everything in the continuation of life. Vigil over the eggs, cycles of patience. The act of egg-laying transforms the carefully constructed nest from an empty monument to engineering into a living repository of future life. The eggs themselves, each one roughly the size of a football and weighing nearly 10 pounds, represent the culmination of months of preparation and the beginning of a new phase in the reproductive cycle. Their mottled shells, tough enough to protect the developing embryos but porous enough to allow for gas exchange, gleam with a subtle iridescence in the morning light. The arrangement of the eggs within the nest is not random, but follows patterns that optimize incubation conditions for each individual embryo. The 7 eggs are positioned in a careful spiral, with each one oriented to receive optimal heat from the decomposing organic matter, while maintaining access to the air circulation that will provide oxygen for the developing young. The positioning requires constant adjustment as the eggs shift and settle, a process that demands vigilance and immediate response to any disruption. The sharing of incubation duties between my mate and myself creates a rhythm that will govern our lives for the next 3 weeks. The watches are carefully coordinated, with one parent always present while the other forages for food or patrols the territory for potential threats. The handoff between shifts is a delicate process, requiring clear communication and perfect timing to ensure that the eggs are never left unattended for more than a few minutes. The physical act of incubation involves more than simply sitting on the eggs. My massive body must be positioned with exquisite care to provide warmth without crushing the delicate shells beneath my weight. The process requires constant micro-adjustments, shifting my bulk to ensure even heat distribution while maintaining the vigilance necessary to detect and respond to threats. The sensation of the eggs beneath me, warm and alive with developing life, creates a connection that transcends the purely physical to become something deeply emotional. The 3-week incubation period unfolds in cycles that test every aspect of endurance and commitment. Each day brings its own challenges, from the scorching heat of midday sun that threatens to overheat the eggs to the cool nights when additional insulation becomes necessary. The decomposing organic matter that provides baseline heat requires constant monitoring and occasional adjustment, adding or removing material to maintain the precise temperature needed for healthy embryonic development. The weather extremes of the ancient world create some of the most challenging conditions for successful incubation. The blistering sun of midday can raise nest temperatures to dangerous levels, requiring the brooding parent to provide shade through careful positioning while still maintaining contact with the eggs. The technique involves angling my massive body to create shadows that protect the eggs while allowing air circulation to prevent overheating. The chilling nights present the opposite challenge, as temperatures can drop dramatically once the sun disappears below the horizon. During these periods, I must use my body heat more actively, settling more closely over the eggs while adding insulating materials to the nest's surface. The balance between providing warmth and maintaining air circulation becomes even more critical during these cold periods, requiring constant attention to the subtle signs that indicate proper incubation conditions. The psychological challenges of the incubation period are as demanding as the physical ones. The enforced stillness required for proper egg care goes against every instinct of an active predator, creating a tension between the need for vigilance and the requirement for patience. The hours stretch endlessly, each one measured by the gradual changes in light and temperature that mark the passage of time. Boredom becomes a constant companion, broken only by the occasional threat or the brief respite of shift changes. The shift changes with my mate provide the only regular breaks in the monotony of incubation duty. These transitions are carefully choreographed, with the returning parent approaching the nest with specific vocalizations that announce their arrival. The exchange of information during these handoffs is crucial, covering everything from the egg's condition to potential threats observed in the surrounding area. The brief moments of physical contact during these transitions provide emotional support that helps sustain both parents through the long weeks ahead. The tense moment with the approaching dromaeosaur serves as a stark reminder of the constant vigilance required during incubation. The smaller predator approaches the nest with the cautious boldness of a creature testing the commitment of the defending parents. Its interest in the eggs is unmistakable, its behavior suggesting that it's probing for weakness or distraction that might provide an opportunity for theft. The defensive response is immediate and overwhelming, transforming the patient incubating parent into a formidable guardian in seconds. The threat display involves rising to full height, spreading wings that seem to double my apparent size, and emitting vocalizations that leave no doubt about my willingness to defend the nest with lethal force. The dromaeosaur's retreat is swift and decisive, its survival instincts overriding any thoughts of egg theft in the face of such overwhelming opposition. The aftermath of the threat encounter leaves me shaken but more alert, the adrenaline serving as a reminder of the stakes involved in this vigil. The eggs beneath me represent not just potential offspring, but the continuation of genetic lines that stretch back millions of years. The responsibility of protecting them creates a weight that goes beyond the physical demands of incubation to encompass the emotional and psychological pressure of ensuring species survival. The subtle changes in the eggs as development progresses provide the only clear markers of time's passage during the long incubation period. The shells, initially smooth and uniform, begin to show slight variations in texture as the embryos grow and develop within. The weight distribution shifts as the developing young move and change position, creating new balance points that require constant adjustment in brooding technique. The sounds that begin to emerge from within the eggs during the final week of incubation create excitement and anticipation that makes the remaining time almost unbearable. The soft scratching and tapping sounds indicate that the embryos are beginning to interact with their environment, testing the boundaries of their shells and preparing for the momentous transition to independent life. These sounds, barely audible even to my sensitive hearing, represent the first communication between parents and offspring, a preview of the complex relationships that will define the coming months. The internal development of the embryos follows patterns that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. The transformation from simple cells to complex organisms capable of independent survival represents one of the most remarkable processes in the natural world. The eggs provide not just protection, but also nutrition, with the developing young absorbing the proteins and fats stored in the yolk to fuel their growth and development. The temperature regulation during the final stages of incubation becomes even more critical as the embryos approach readiness for hatching. The decomposing organic matter that has provided baseline heat throughout the incubation period begins to lose its effectiveness, requiring more active management from the brooding parents. The balance between providing necessary warmth and avoiding overheating becomes increasingly delicate as the embryos become more sensitive to temperature variations. The anticipation builds with each passing day as the incubation period nears its end. The signs of impending hatching become more numerous and obvious, from the increased movement within the eggs to the subtle changes in shell coloration that indicate the embryos are preparing for their emergence. The patient vigil that has defined the past 3 weeks is approaching its culmination, and with it, the transformation from guardian of potential life to active parent of living young. The final days of incubation are marked by increased activity from both parents as they prepare for the dramatic changes that hatching will bring. The nest area is cleared of debris that might pose hazards to newly hatched young, while food supplies are cached nearby to provide for the increased nutritional demands of feeding growing offspring. The preparation extends beyond the physical to include psychological readiness for the intense period of parental care that lies ahead. The vigil over the eggs represents more than just a reproductive duty. It embodies the fundamental commitment that defines successful parenting in the dangerous world of apex predators. The patience, vigilance, and sacrifice required during these 3 weeks create bonds between parents and offspring that will influence behavior long after the young have achieved independence. The eggs beneath me are not just the future of my genetic line, but the continuation of the ancient story of life itself, a narrative that connects every generation to those that came before and those that will follow. A dangerous famine-prey scarcity. The first signs of the approaching famine are subtle, noticed only by a predator who has learned to read the complex signals of ecosystem health. The usual morning chorus of herbivore vocalizations seems thinner, less robust, missing the deeper tones that indicate the presence of the largest grazing animals. The scent trails that normally crisscross my territory are fewer and fainter, suggesting that the great herds have begun their migration to more favorable feeding grounds. The drought that has gripped the region for weeks is finally beginning to show its effects on the delicate balance of predator and prey. The seasonal drought transforms the landscape with ruthless efficiency, turning the normally lush floodplain into a patchwork of cracked earth and dying vegetation. The waterholes that once provided reliable sources of both water and prey gathering spots now lie empty, their dried beds revealing the complex geology beneath. The river that forms the eastern boundary of my territory has dropped to levels not seen in years, exposing sandbars and rocky outcrops that were previously hidden beneath the flowing water. The migration of the herbivore herds northward represents a catastrophic disruption to the food web that has sustained predators like me throughout the growing season. The Edmontosaurus groups that once provided reliable hunting opportunities have vanished, their massive tracks leading away from my territory toward the distant mountains, where seasonal rains might still support the vegetation they need to survive. The smaller herbivores follow in their wake, creating a domino effect that leaves the landscape increasingly barren of suitable prey. The hunger that builds during the first week of the famine is unlike anything I've experienced since my juvenile years. The constant, gnawing sensation in my belly serves as a reminder of the massive caloric requirements that come with maintaining a 7-ton body. The fat reserves that normally sustain me between kills begin to dwindle, creating a sense of urgency that affects every aspect of my behavior. The patient hunting strategies that work during times of abundance become liabilities when prey is scarce, and every opportunity must be exploited immediately. The discovery of the decaying ankylosaur carcass represents both salvation and humiliation, a reminder of how quickly the mighty can fall when circumstances change. The massive herbivore, its armored hide still intact but its flesh well into the decomposition process, lies in a dried stream bed where it probably died of thirst or heat exhaustion. The smell of decay is overwhelming, a putrid mixture of rotting flesh and bacterial growth that would normally send me searching for fresher prey. The decision to scavenge from the ankylosaur carcass is one of the most difficult I've made in my adult life. Every instinct rebels against consuming meat that has been dead for days, flesh that carries the risk of disease and the stigma of failure. But the hunger that gnaws at my belly provides a compelling counter-argument to pride, and the reality of my situation makes the choice inevitable. The survival of my species depends on adaptability, and this moment tests my ability to adapt to circumstances beyond my control. The approach to the carcass is cautious and methodical, driven by the need to assess both the safety of the meat and the potential for competition from other scavengers. The ankylosaur's death has not gone unnoticed by the ecosystem's cleanup crew, and I can see the signs of previous visitors in the disturbed ground around the carcass. The tracks tell a story of desperate competition, with various predators and scavengers taking turns at the decaying feast. The meat, when I finally force myself to consume it, is tough and stringy, flavored with the chemicals of decomposition that make every bite a struggle. The texture is wrong, lacking the firm consistency of fresh kill, while the taste carries undertones of decay that trigger warning signals throughout my nervous system. But the protein and fat content, while diminished by decomposition, still provide essential nutrients that my starving body craves. The moral calculation that accompanies scavenging behavior reveals the complex ethical landscape that governs predator behavior. The consumption of carrion violates deeply ingrained preferences for fresh meat, but it also demonstrates the flexibility that has allowed predators to survive environmental challenges throughout evolutionary history. The ability to exploit whatever resources are available, regardless of their quality or origin, represents a crucial survival skill that separates successful predators from those who starve when conditions become difficult. The risk assessment involved in consuming questionable meat requires careful attention to the subtle signals that indicate potential health hazards. The smell of the meat provides information about bacterial loads and the presence of dangerous pathogens, while the texture and appearance offer clues about the stage of decomposition. The decision to consume or reject specific portions of the carcass becomes a complex calculation of nutritional need versus health risk. The physical effects of consuming partially decomposed meat are immediate and unpleasant. The unusual proteins and bacterial byproducts create digestive distress that serves as a reminder of why fresh meat is preferred. The nausea and intestinal discomfort that follow the meal are balanced against the essential nutrition that the meat provides, creating a cost-benefit analysis that favors short-term discomfort over long-term starvation. The psychological impact of scavenging extends beyond the immediate physical effects to include a fundamental challenge to self-image and status. The transformation from apex predator to desperate scavenger represents a fall from grace that affects confidence and behavioral patterns. The experience serves as a humbling reminder of the thin line between predator and prey, between success and failure. In the unforgiving world of the ancient ecosystem, the competition with other scavengers adds another layer of complexity to the scavenging experience. The various predators and opportunistic feeders that visit the carcass create a temporary community bound together by desperation and hunger. The social dynamics of this group are different from the normal territorial behaviors that govern predator interactions, based more on mutual tolerance than dominance hierarchies. The consideration of abandoning the nest site represents the most agonizing decision of the entire famine period. The eggs represent months of investment and the future of my genetic line, but they also require constant protection and attention that limits my ability to search for food. The choice between personal survival and reproductive success creates a moral dilemma that has no easy answers, a test of priorities that strikes at the heart of what it means to be a parent. The brief abandonment of the nest to search for food is undertaken with extreme reluctance and careful planning. The timing must be perfect, coordinated with my mate's return from her own foraging expedition, to minimize the time the eggs are left undefended. The search area is limited to the immediate vicinity of the nest, close enough to allow for rapid return if threats are detected, but far enough to explore areas that might contain overlooked prey. The physical effects of starvation become increasingly apparent as the famine continues. The loss of body weight is gradual but noticeable, with the thick layer of fat that normally insulates my body beginning to disappear. The skin becomes looser around my frame, while the muscles that provide the power for hunting and territorial defense begin to lose their definition. The overall effect is a transformation from the imposing presence of a well-fed predator to the gaunt desperation of a creature struggling for survival. The psychological effects of hunger are perhaps even more challenging than the physical ones. The constant preoccupation with food affects decision-making and risk assessment, creating a tunnel vision that prioritizes immediate nutritional needs over long-term survival strategies. The normal patience and calculated approach that characterizes successful predation gives way to a more desperate, reactive approach that increases the risk of injury or failure. The famine serves as a reminder of the complex relationships that bind predators to their prey and to the environmental conditions that support both. The drought that has driven away the herbivore herds represents a natural disaster that affects every level of the ecosystem, from the smallest insects to the largest predators. The survival of individual animals depends not just on their own adaptability, but on the health and stability of the entire food web that sustains them. Clash with an ankylosaur armor versus bite. The desperation of hunger drives decisions that would be unthinkable under normal circumstances, transforming the patient, calculated hunter into something more reckless, more dangerous to both prey and predator alike. The ankylosaur I've been stalking for the past hour represents one of the most challenging prey animals in the ancient world, a living fortress of bone and muscle that has evolved specifically to survive encounters with predators like me. But the gnawing hunger that has plagued me for days overrides caution, pushing me toward a confrontation that will test every aspect of my strength, skill, and determination. The nodosaur stands nearly 5 feet tall at the shoulder and stretches over 20 feet from nose to tail, its massive bulk supported by 4 tree trunk legs that end in broad, padded feet. Its back is covered in a mosaic of bony plates and spikes that form an almost impenetrable armor, while its sides are protected by rows of smaller osteoderms that overlap like the scales of some mythical dragon. The creature's head, small in proportion to its body, is encased in a helmet of bone that protects the brain while leaving only the eyes and nostrils exposed. The approach to this living tank requires a strategy entirely different from the ambush tactics that work so well against the herbivores that usually make up my diet. The ankylosaur's armor makes a direct frontal assault not just ineffective, but potentially suicidal, as the creature's defensive adaptations have been refined over millions of years to defeat exactly the kind of attack that predators like me naturally favor. The challenge lies in finding the weak points in what appears to be perfect defensive armor. The initial attack comes from the ankylosaur's blind spot, a carefully calculated approach that brings me within striking distance before the armored herbivore can fully assess the threat. My massive jaws close on what I hope will be a vulnerable spot near the base of the skull, but the bone plating is thicker than anticipated, and my teeth scrape against armor instead of penetrating flesh. The impact sends shockwaves through both our bodies, but the ankylosaur's response is immediate and devastating. The tail club that gives ankylosaurs their name is not just a defensive weapon but a precision instrument of destruction, capable of generating forces that can shatter bone and pulverize internal organs. The massive knot of fused vertebrae at the end of the tail, supported by powerful muscles and reinforced with additional bone deposits, swings toward me with the inevitability of a falling tree. The impact, when it connects with my rib cage, produces a sound like breaking timber and a pain that radiates through my entire torso. The cracked rib that results from the tail club impact is more than just a painful injury. It represents a potentially life-threatening wound that will affect my ability to hunt and defend myself for weeks to come. The sharp edges of the broken bone create internal damage with every breath, while the disruption to my chest muscles makes the powerful movements required for effective hunting increasingly difficult. The injury serves as an immediate reminder of the risks involved in attacking such well-defended prey. The strategy shift that follows the initial failure requires quick thinking and adaptability under pressure. The frontal assault that seemed logical given my size and strength advantages has proven ineffective against the ankylosaur's armor, forcing me to reconsider my approach. The creature's defensive capabilities are formidable, but they also create limitations in mobility and vision that a clever predator can exploit. The feint that precedes my second attack is designed to manipulate the ankylosaur's position and create an opening in its defenses. By approaching from one side and then suddenly shifting direction, I can force the armored herbivore to commit to a defensive posture that exposes its more vulnerable areas. The creature's heavy armor, while providing excellent protection, also makes rapid directional changes difficult, creating windows of opportunity for a more agile predator. The target for my second attack is the ankylosaur's belly, the one area where the armor is necessarily thinner to allow for the flexibility needed for movement and feeding. The approach requires me to get beneath the creature's defensive perimeter, exposing myself to the crushing power of its feet and the deadly sweep of its tail club. The maneuver is dangerous in the extreme, but the alternative is continued starvation in a landscape increasingly empty of easier prey. The successful bite that finally brings down the ankylosaur is both a triumph of predatory skill and a testament to the evolutionary arms race between predator and prey. The flesh of the belly, while still tough and protected by layers of muscle and fat, yields to the crushing power of my jaws in a way that the armor plating never could. The taste of fresh blood after days of hunger is intoxicating, a reminder of what I've been risking everything to achieve. The death throes of the ankylosaur are violent and prolonged, the creature's massive body convulsing with the desperate energy of an animal fighting for its life. The thrashing tail continues to pose a threat even as the creature weakens, requiring constant vigilance and quick reflexes to avoid further injury. The process is exhausting for both predator and prey, a final test of endurance that determines the outcome of this prehistoric battle. The consumption of the ankylosaur meat provides more than just nutrition. It represents a psychological victory over the famine conditions that have dominated my existence for weeks. The flesh, while tough and requiring significant effort to process, contains the proteins and fats that my body has been craving. Each bite helps to restore the energy reserves that have been depleted by days of unsuccessful hunting and the constant stress of protecting the nest. The hard-won nature of this meal makes it more satisfying than any easy kill could be. The knowledge that I've overcome one of the most challenging prey animals in the ancient world through skill, determination, and sheer willpower creates a sense of accomplishment that transcends mere nutrition. The success serves as a reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, the combination of intelligence, adaptability, and raw predatory power can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The recovery period that follows the successful hunt is crucial for healing both the physical injuries sustained during the battle and the psychological wounds inflicted by the famine. The rich nutrition provided by the ankylosaur meat accelerates the healing process, while the security of having a substantial food source reduces the stress hormones that have been flooding my system for days. The return to normal hunting patterns seems possible for the first time in weeks. The lesson learned from this encounter extends beyond the immediate success of securing food to encompass a deeper understanding of predatory capabilities and limitations. The ankylosaur's defenses were formidable, but they were not impenetrable. The key to success lay not in overwhelming force, but in finding the right strategy, the correct approach that could exploit the inevitable weaknesses in even the most sophisticated defensive systems. The experience also reinforces the importance of adaptability in predatory behavior. The initial strategy that seemed most logical proved ineffective, requiring quick thinking and willingness to change tactics under pressure. The ability to learn from failure and adjust approach mid-hunt represents one of the most valuable skills a predator can possess, often making the difference between success and starvation. The aftermath of the battle leaves me with a renewed respect for the defensive capabilities of armored herbivores and a better understanding of the risks involved in attacking such well-protected prey. The injury I sustained will serve as a lasting reminder of the costs associated with desperate hunting, while the success of the hunt demonstrates that even the most challenging prey can be overcome with the right combination of skill, strategy, and determination. The stabilization of my health following the consumption of the ankylosaur meat marks the beginning of recovery from the famine conditions that have dominated recent weeks. The protein and fat content of the meat provides the building blocks needed for tissue repair and the restoration of energy reserves. The psychological impact of successful hunting also contributes to overall well-being, restoring confidence and reducing the stress responses that have been affecting my behavior. The hard-won meal represents more than just temporary relief from hunger. It symbolizes the triumph of predatory adaptation over environmental challenge. The famine conditions that drove me to attempt such a dangerous hunt will pass, but the lessons learned and the skills developed during this period of adversity will remain, adding to the accumulated knowledge that defines successful predation in the ancient world. The long-term implications of this successful hunt extend far beyond the immediate satisfaction of hunger. The knowledge gained from successfully bringing down such a formidable opponent will inform future hunting decisions, providing insights into the vulnerabilities of armored prey that could prove invaluable in similar circumstances. The experience becomes part of the accumulated wisdom that separates experienced predators from those who rely solely on size and strength. The healing process that follows the battle is gradual but steady, with the rich nutrition from the ankylosaur meat providing the raw materials needed for tissue repair and recovery. The cracked rib, while painful, begins to knit together as my body's natural healing processes are supported by adequate nutrition. The lesson learned about the true costs of desperate hunting will influence future risk assessments, creating a more nuanced understanding of when such dangerous gambles are justified. The success of this hunt also serves as a reminder of the complex relationships that exist between predators and their environment. The drought conditions that created the famine also concentrated the remaining herbivores in predictable locations, making encounters with normally elusive prey more likely. The environmental pressures that threatened my survival also created opportunities for those with the skill and determination to exploit them. As the immediate crisis of starvation passes, I find myself changed by the experience, both physically and psychologically. The scars from the battle will fade, but the knowledge gained and the confidence earned through overcoming such a formidable challenge will remain. The harsh lessons of the famine period have added new dimensions to my understanding of what it means to be an apex predator in a world where survival depends on more than just size and strength. The ankylosaur's defeat represents not just a meal secured, but a testament to the evolutionary forces that have shaped both predator and prey over millions of years. The arms race between offensive and defensive capabilities continues, with each successful hunt adding to the selective pressures that drive adaptation and evolution. In this ancient world, survival belongs not to the strongest or the most heavily armored, but to those who can adapt, learn, and overcome the challenges that nature presents. Epilogue. The eternal cycle. The months that follow bring with them the natural rhythms of recovery and renewal that define life in the ancient world. The drought that created the famine conditions eventually breaks, bringing with it the return of the rains and the gradual restoration of the ecosystem's balance. The herbivore herds begin their migration back to the now verdant floodplains, while the predators who survived the lean times prepare to resume their normal hunting patterns. The eggs that survived the vigil of the famine period finally hatch, producing a new generation of predators who will face their own challenges in the years to come. The lessons learned during the dark days of scarcity inform the care and training of these young hunters, passing on the hard-won wisdom that will help them navigate the dangers of their ancient world. The cycle of life continues, unbroken by the temporary disruptions that tested the survival skills of their parents. The territory that once seemed so secure and productive is gradually reclaimed and expanded as the abundance of returning prey creates opportunities for growth and expansion. The scent markers that define the boundaries of my domain are refreshed and extended, while the acoustic signals that maintain territorial control ring out once more across the recovering landscape. The complex social networks that govern predator society are rebuilt and strengthened, creating stability from the chaos of the famine period. The relationship with my mate, tested by the stresses of protecting eggs during times of scarcity, emerges stronger and more resilient. The shared experience of overcoming adversity has created bonds that extend beyond the immediate needs of reproduction to encompass a deeper understanding of partnership and mutual support. The lessons learned about cooperation and sacrifice during the darkest days will influence future reproductive efforts and territorial defense. The scars from the battle with the ankylosaur fade, but never disappear entirely, serving as permanent reminders of the costs and risks associated with apex predation. The knowledge gained from that desperate encounter becomes part of the accumulated wisdom that defines successful hunting, informing future decisions about when to engage dangerous prey and when to seek easier alternatives. The experience becomes a defining moment in the evolution from merely powerful predator to truly experienced hunter. The ecosystem itself begins to show signs of recovery, with the return of the rains bringing new growth and renewed abundance. The water holes that had dried to cracked earth begin to refill, creating gathering places for the returning herbivore herds. The vegetation that had withered during the drought puts forth new shoots and leaves, providing the foundation for the complex food web that supports predators like me. The seasonal patterns that govern life in the ancient world reassert themselves, bringing with them the predictable rhythms of hunting, territory maintenance, and reproduction. The chaos of the famine period gives way to the more manageable challenges of normal predator existence, though the lessons learned during that time of crisis remain ever present in memory and behavior. The young predators who emerge from the eggs that survived the famine carry with them the genetic legacy of parents who proved their fitness through survival of the harshest conditions. Their first months of life are spent learning the skills and behaviors that will determine their own survival, guided by parents whose experience encompasses both the normal challenges of predator life and the extraordinary tests of environmental disaster. The story of survival continues, written in the complex interactions between predator and prey, between individual and environment, between the immediate needs of survival and the long-term requirements of species continuation. Each day brings new challenges and opportunities, each season its own tests of adaptation and resilience. The ancient world rolls on, indifferent to the struggles of its inhabitants, but providing the stage upon which the eternal drama of life and death plays out. In the end, the experience of life as a Tyrannosaurus rex is one of constant adaptation, endless challenge and ultimate triumph over the forces that would claim the lives of lesser creatures. The combination of size, strength, intelligence, and adaptability that defines the apex predator creates a life of both privilege and responsibility, of dominance, earned through struggle, and maintained through constant vigilance. The floodplains that witnessed the struggles of the famine period now teem with life once more, their waters clear and their vegetation lush. The scars of the drought have healed, leaving behind a landscape that seems renewed and refreshed. The cycle continues, eternal and unbroken, carrying forward the genetic legacy of those who survived the dark times and the lessons learned from their triumph over adversity. The story ends as it began, with the dawn of a new day and the eternal challenges of survival in a world where only the strongest, smartest, and most adaptable can hope to pass on their genes to future generations. The ancient world continues its slow dance through time, indifferent to the struggles of its inhabitants, but providing the endless theater in which the drama of evolution plays out, one day, one hunt, one successful survival at a time.